Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving deep into a world rarely spoken about, the shadowy, secretive life of medieval midwives. This wasn't just a job of bringing babies into the world, it was a role wrapped in mystery, suspicion, and danger. These women held immense knowledge, but also faced harsh judgment and terrifying accusations. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Only if you truly enjoy the journey here. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing our community's global reach now. Get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and let's step quietly into the hidden world of medieval midwives together. The midwife who was burned for witchcraft. Helping women bring new life into the world was one of the most vital yet perilous roles in medieval society. Midwives held profound knowledge of herbal remedies, birthing techniques, and care that could mean the difference between life and death. Yet, this sacred work, essential and compassionate, sometimes drew deadly suspicion. Among these women was a midwife whose skill and success in saving mothers and infants became her undoing. She was accused of witchcraft, of wielding unnatural powers, and was executed by burning. This tragic story reveals the complex intersection of medicine, gender, fear, and power in the medieval era. In a time when childbirth was fraught with danger, the survival of both mother and child was never guaranteed. Maternal mortality rates were staggeringly high. Without the knowledge of antiseptics, antibiotics, or modern hygiene, every delivery carried immense risk. Midwives often relied on oral traditions passed down through generations, mixing herbs with empirical experience to ease pain, induce labor, or stop hemorrhaging. Their hands and wisdom saved many lives in an era where the stakes were literally life or death. But this expertise was double-edged. In many communities, midwives operated outside the formal medical establishment dominated by men, often physicians who had studied in universities but rarely attended births themselves. Midwives' knowledge was rooted in folk traditions, herbalism, and hands-on practice. Their power came from deep community trust, but also from a mysterious aura surrounding childbirth itself, an event both miraculous and terrifying. Religious authorities and societal powers often viewed this mysterious knowledge with suspicion. The late medieval and early modern periods were marked by a wave of witch hunts that disproportionately targeted women, especially those who were healers, herbalists, or midwives. These women, because of their knowledge and independence, threatened established norms. The line between healing and witchcraft was dangerously thin in the eyes of fearful neighbors and zealous inquisitors. The midwife in question had helped countless women survive childbirth at a time when many births ended in tragedy. Her success was remarkable and unusual enough to attract attention. Rather than praise, however, whispers of suspicion spread. She was accused of using unnatural powers, a vague and terrifying charge that could mean anything from healing magic to consorting with demonic forces. The accusation was not simply about superstition, but was often a way to control women who defied societal expectations or threatened male authority in medicine and religion. Historically, accusations of witchcraft against midwives were fueled by multiple factors. A failed birth or the death of a mother or child could quickly be blamed on maleficence rather than misfortune. In some cases, jealousy or personal grudges led neighbors to denounce a midwife. Religious dogma painted the womb and birth as fraught with spiritual peril, where evil could intervene. A midwife's intimate knowledge of the body and her ability to influence life itself made her both revered and feared. Trials of accused midwives were often brutal. They faced interrogation, torture, and forced confessions. The courts relied on spectral evidence, hearsay, and superstition rather than factual proof. In many regions, burning at the stake was the grim punishment for those found guilty of witchcraft, a public spectacle intended to deter others and reinforce social order. This particular midwife story reflects the broader context of women healers who became victims of systemic misogyny and fear. Despite saving lives and serving their communities, they were vulnerable to persecution. The irony is profound. The very skills that made them indispensable could also mark them for destruction. Medieval texts and court records show numerous cases where midwives were singled out. Their herbal concoctions, once remedies, became evidence of sorcery. Their prayers and rituals, intended to protect mother and child, were twisted into signs of occult practices. Even the natural unpredictability of childbirth was recast as proof of supernatural interference. This tragic fate also reveals how medicine and science evolved under the shadow of such persecution. As midwives were suppressed, the medical profession became more institutionalized and male-dominated. Women's contributions to healthcare, particularly in childbirth, were marginalized or erased from history. The loss was not only personal but cultural, as generations of practical knowledge were stifled. The story of the midwife who was burned for witchcraft is a somber reminder of the dangers of fear and ignorance. It underscores how women's bodies and knowledge became battlegrounds for power struggles, social control, and religious orthodoxy. It also highlights the resilience of those who dared to heal in hostile times. Today, we recognize the vital role midwives played throughout history, often under impossible circumstances. Their legacy lives on in modern midwifery and women's healthcare, fields that strive to reclaim the respect and dignity denied to their predecessors. The story calls us to remember the countless unnamed women who risked everything to bring life into the world. It challenges us to confront how fear can warp justice and how prejudice can extinguish the light of knowledge. Most importantly, it honors the courage of those midwives who, despite the threat of death, stood steadfast in their commitment to healing and care. In reflecting on this dark chapter, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of history, the tragic consequences of superstition, and the enduring human spirit that fights to nurture life against all odds. The baby born with teeth. That sparked panic. When a baby was born with teeth in medieval Europe, the event was far from a medical curiosity or a mere biological anomaly. Instead, it became a source of profound fear, superstition, and suspicion, often endangering not just the newborn, but everyone involved in the birth, especially the midwife. In a world where the boundaries between the natural and supernatural were blurred, and knowledge of human biology was rudimentary at best, a baby born with teeth was seen as a terrifying omen, a sign that something unnatural or even demonic had occurred. The birth of a baby with teeth was rare, but not unheard of. Known medically as natal teeth, these early teeth could emerge in a newborn's mouth at or just after birth. Today, this is understood as a natural, though uncommon, variation in human development. However, in medieval times, such knowledge did not exist, and the phenomenon was interpreted through the lens of religious belief, folklore, and fear of the devil's influence. Teeth were powerful symbols, associated with biting, danger, and sometimes evil. To see them appear in a helpless infant seemed a direct affront to the divine order and natural law. The midwife who delivered such a child was at the center of the storm. Midwives held a precarious position in medieval society. They were essential, skilled women trusted to bring life into the world, yet they also bore the burden of suspicion. Their knowledge of herbs, remedies, and birth rituals could be misunderstood as witchcraft or heresy. When a child was born with teeth, villagers, gripped by fear and superstition, often accused the midwife of summoning demons or consorting with dark forces. This fear could escalate quickly, leading to violent accusations, public shaming, or worse. In one recorded historical incident, a baby born with teeth triggered widespread panic in a small village. The midwife, once trusted, was suddenly viewed as a threat to the community. Rumors swirled that she had invoked evil spirits or cursed the family. The villagers, driven by a collective dread of the supernatural, gathered with intentions to punish her severely. Lynching was a real threat. In such a volatile atmosphere, the intervention of the local priest became the only hope to save the midwife from certain death. The priest's role was crucial in medieval society as a spiritual authority and mediator between the people and the divine. Upon hearing of the baby's birth and the ensuing hysteria, the priest stepped in to calm fears, reminding the villagers that such events were not necessarily the work of the devil. Using religious rhetoric and the power of the church, he reassured the people that the baby was a child of God and not a demon in disguise. The priest's blessing and declaration often quelled the panic, saving the midwife from brutal retribution. This episode highlights the profound intertwining of medicine, religion, and superstition in the Middle Ages. Without scientific understanding, physical anomalies were immediately framed in a moral and supernatural context. Midwives, despite their essential role, lived under constant threat because their knowledge and power were mysterious and easily demonized. The baby with teeth was not just a medical curiosity, but a catalyst that exposed the fragile balance between fear, faith, and survival in medieval communities. Medieval childbirth was perilous, with high risks for both mother and child. Midwives were often the only skilled attendants available, relying on passed-down knowledge from generations of women. Their methods combined practical skills with ritualistic elements intended to protect mother and baby from evil spirits, curses, or divine wrath. The fear surrounding natal teeth fit into a broader pattern where anything unusual at birth could be perceived as a sign of ill omen or malevolent influence. Historical records and folklore are rich with stories of strange births, monstrous children, and cursed families. Natal teeth often appeared in these tales as marks of otherworldliness or as evidence that dark forces had intervened. Such beliefs were reinforced by the Church's teachings that sin and evil were tangible forces active in the world, capable of manifesting in physical forms. Consequently, an infant born with teeth could be interpreted as a living symbol of sin or a herald of doom, demanding immediate action from the community. The peril for the midwife stemmed from her ambiguous social position. While necessary, she was not fully trusted by the male-dominated medical and religious hierarchy. Accusations of witchcraft were common for midwives, especially when outcomes were poor or events were inexplicable. The birth of a baby with teeth was a prime example of a bad omen that could be pinned on the midwife to explain the inexplicable. The social dynamics of the village, combined with fear and lack of understanding, made such accusations a dangerous reality. The intervention of the local priest was pivotal, not only because he had spiritual authority, but because he could articulate a narrative that restored order. By invoking Christian doctrine and blessings, he framed the birth as part of God's mysterious plan rather than demonic interference. This reframing allowed the community to accept the anomaly without resorting to violence or persecution. It shows how religious figures often acted as stabilizers in communities prone to hysteria and superstition. This story also reflects the precarious nature of medieval life, where natural events were never neutral but always charged with meaning. Every birth, death, or illness was imbued with symbolic significance, influencing social cohesion and individual fate. The baby born with teeth, an extraordinary but natural occurrence, became a flashpoint, revealing how fear, faith, and authority intersected to shape human experiences and destinies. Understanding this historical context helps us see the midwife not just as a victim, but as a figure embodying the complex dynamics of knowledge, gender, and power in medieval society. Her knowledge saved lives, but also made her vulnerable to accusations that could destroy her. The baby's teeth, a natural biological variation, became a symbol that tested the limits of communal trust and belief. This episode serves as a powerful reminder of how far medical science has come and how deeply fear and superstition once shaped human reactions to the unknown. The midwife's story, trapped between life-giving skill and deadly suspicion, tells us much about the medieval mindset, where miracles and monsters were often two sides of the same coin, and where a child's first teeth could spark panic that threatened to consume an innocent woman. Today, when a baby is born with teeth, it is met with curiosity and sometimes concern, but never with suspicion or violence. This shift highlights not only advances in medical knowledge, but also the profound transformation of cultural beliefs. The story of the baby born with teeth in medieval times remains a haunting testament to the power of fear and the fragile nature of trust in times long past. In closing, the panic sparked by a baby born with teeth encapsulates the tension between mystery and understanding, superstition and science, life and death in medieval society. It shows how a simple, natural event could unravel social order and threaten a woman whose only crime was bringing new life into the world under extraordinary circumstances. The intervention of the priest and the eventual calming of the villagers reflect a moment where faith, authority, and reason intersected to save a life from the jaws of fear and superstition. The woman who delivered a lord's secret child. In the shadowed corridors of medieval nobility, where power was often wielded behind closed doors, secrets were currency more precious than gold. Among these secrets, none was more fiercely guarded than the births of illegitimate children born to noblewomen, children whose very existence could ignite scandal, destroy alliances, or topple dynasties. In this world of whispered lies and silent loyalties, midwives held an extraordinary and dangerous role. They were the keepers of life, the silent witnesses to the most intimate and perilous moments of childbirth. Yet their knowledge was a double-edged sword, a power that could protect or condemn. This is the story of one such midwife, a woman who bore the burden of a lord's secret child and paid the ultimate price for her silence. The role of the midwife in medieval society was complex. While their expertise was vital, bringing new life into a world where maternal mortality was high and medical knowledge limited, midwives also walked a precarious tightrope. They served women of all social classes, from humble peasants to the highest nobility, and in doing so, they often became privy to secrets that could unravel social and political order. Midwives were expected to protect these secrets with absolute discretion. But in a time when a noblewoman's honor was bound to the legitimacy of her offspring, even a hint of scandal could be deadly. Our story begins in a wealthy lord's manor somewhere in late medieval England, a time when lineage and inheritance shaped every aspect of power. The lord, a man of considerable influence, had fathered a child outside his marriage. The mother was a noblewoman, possibly his wife, or a secret mistress, whose reputation had to be preserved at all costs. The birth was concealed with the utmost care, orchestrated behind closed doors with only the most trusted attendants present. At the heart of this concealment was the midwife, a woman both skilled and trusted, the guardian of this forbidden life. In those days, the birth of an illegitimate child in noble circles was a perilous secret to keep. Acknowledging such a birth risked political ruin, loss of alliances, and social ostracism. For the midwife, It was a sacred duty to ensure the mother's secrecy, to protect the infant's life, and to ensure the child's existence was erased from public record. But this secrecy was dangerous. It placed the midwife in a position of silent power, a potential threat to the fragile equilibrium of noble society. According to records from that era, midwives who stepped beyond their role, whether by gossiping, sympathizing too openly, or threatening to expose secrets, often faced dire consequences. They lived in fear of retribution, for nobles and their allies wielded justice with ruthless efficiency when their reputations were at stake. The midwife in our story was reputed for her skill and discretion. She had safely delivered many noble infants, earning trust that was as much a blessing as a curse. But one fateful night, after attending to the Lord's secret child, her silence faltered. Whether driven by compassion, fear, or a desire to protect the innocent child, she confided the secret to a few trusted villagers, or perhaps she simply spoke too loudly or in the wrong place. Word spread quickly, and what was meant to be a tightly held secret became known beyond the manor's walls. The morning after, the midwife was found dead near a village well. The circumstances were suspicious, cloaked in the fog of whispered rumors and half-truths. Some said she had been silenced by agents of the Lord. Others suspected she had taken her own life, crushed by the weight of the secret she could no longer bear. What is certain is that her death sent a chilling message to all who knew of the delicate balance between life, secrecy, and power in medieval noble circles. This tragic event highlights the perilous role midwives played in enforcing the social order. They were not only caregivers, but also enforcers of silence, bound by loyalty to their noble patrons and the unwritten rules of discretion. The secrecy surrounding illegitimate births was maintained at all costs, often through violence or intimidation. Historically, noble illegitimate children were frequently hidden away, their births registered in secret or not at all. Some were sent to foster families or convents, others raised in obscurity, their identities erased to protect the family name. This erasure was essential to maintain claims to titles and lands and to prevent disputes over inheritance. The very survival of noble houses sometimes depended on such ruthless concealments. Midwives, therefore, were caught in the center of a dangerous web. While their vocation was to bring new life safely into the world, their knowledge of secrets made them vulnerable to suspicion and persecution. They were at times accused of witchcraft or conspiracies simply for knowing too much or for becoming inconvenient witnesses. The case of the midwife found dead near the well echoes other recorded incidents where women involved in secret births or unapproved midwifery faced violent ends. It reflects a broader historical truth about the precarious position of women who held knowledge in patriarchal societies. Their expertise could empower them, but also expose them to lethal risk. In many ways, the midwife's tragic fate illuminates the harsh realities of medieval social structures, where class, power, and gender intersected to shape destinies. It shows how the personal was deeply political and how the simple act of childbirth could become a dangerous secret worth killing over. Today, this story resonates as a powerful reminder of the hidden lives and sacrifices of women who served in the shadows of history. It compels us to reflect on how knowledge, power, and silence have long been intertwined, often with deadly consequences. The woman who delivered a Lord's secret child stands as a symbol of courage and tragedy, a midwife whose skill brought life, but whose loyalty demanded silence, ultimately costing her everything. Her story is a haunting echo from the past, a whisper in the dark that reveals the price paid for secrets in a world ruled by power and fear, the herbs that could get you hanged. Owning a simple herb could mean the difference between life and death in medieval Europe. Among the most feared plants was pennyroyal, a small but potent herb that midwives often use to ease pain or induce abortion. But this seemingly harmless botanical remedy hid a deadly secret. Possession of it could land a woman in court accused of witchcraft, sorcery, or even murder. The very act of healing, of aiding childbirth or ending an unwanted pregnancy, was tangled in a web of suspicion, fear, and brutality. Midwives were central figures in medieval communities, entrusted with the sacred and dangerous task of delivering babies and helping women survive the trials of pregnancy. They relied heavily on knowledge passed down through generations, often orally, using herbs, chants, and rituals that blended medicine with the mystical. Pennyroyal was one such herb. Known for its strong aroma and medicinal properties, it was used to stimulate menstruation, relieve cramps, and in some cases, induce miscarriage. However, pennyroyal is highly toxic, and misuse could cause serious harm or death. This dual nature made pennyroyal a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was a valuable remedy for women with few options. On the other, it became evidence against midwives accused of using unnatural powers. As the witch hunts of the late medieval and early modern periods swept through Europe, herbal knowledge was demonized. The church and secular authorities increasingly viewed midwives with suspicion, especially if a woman died after using or being given herbal treatments. The difference between healing and harming became dangerously thin, often determined by social biases and superstition rather than facts. The possession of pennyroyal could be construed as intent to kill, especially in a society where abortion was condemned as a mortal sin and a crime. Midwives were often the first targets in investigations when women miscarried or died in childbirth. They were accused of using the herb to abort pregnancies illicitly or to poison enemies. Trials were brutal and often based on hearsay, rumors, or confessions extracted under torture. In many cases, midwives had no real defense against accusations, as their herbal practices were secretive and incomprehensible to outsiders. Moreover, the fear of herbal poisons went beyond pennyroyal. Plants like belladonna, hemlock, and mandrake were also linked to sorcery and murder. The same plants that could heal could also kill if used improperly or maliciously. This ambiguity fed the paranoia surrounding midwives. Some believed midwives held secret knowledge of poisons and curses, while others respected them as skilled healers. This contradiction put midwives in a precarious social position, vulnerable to persecution. One infamous case illustrating this tension occurred in 17th century England, where a midwife named Elizabeth Frances was tried for witchcraft. Among the accusations was that she used herbs to cause miscarriages. Though evidence was scant, the fear of herbal knowledge and its association with the devil was enough to condemn her. Such cases were not isolated. Across Europe, midwives faced similar fates, often scapegoated for tragedies that were beyond their control in an era with limited medical understanding. The use of pennyroyal and other herbs was part of a broader tradition of herbal medicine in medieval Europe. Herbal guides, known as herbals, cataloged plants and their uses, blending empirical knowledge with folklore. Midwives relied on these texts, but also on practical experience. Their work was vital, yet misunderstood by the authorities, who viewed any deviation from orthodox medicine and theology as dangerous. As the centuries passed, the persecution of midwives for herbal knowledge gradually declined, but the legacy remained. The stigmatization of women's reproductive health and natural remedies continued into modern times, echoing the fear and control wielded by institutions over women's bodies. The story of pennyroyal and midwives stands as a chilling reminder of how knowledge, fear, and power can intertwine to deadly effect. Today, pennyroyal is recognized as toxic and is used cautiously in herbal medicine. Its historical role as a life-saving yet dangerous herb reflects the complex relationship medieval society had with nature, medicine, and women's agency. The midwives who dared to wield such knowledge risked not just their livelihoods, but their lives, walking a thin line between healer and heretic in a world ruled by suspicion and superstition. The story of the herbs that could get you hanged is not just about plants. It's about the struggle for knowledge, control, and survival in a harsh, unforgiving society. It is a testament to the courage of midwives who, despite the threats and trials, continued to serve their communities, quietly defying the forces that sought to silence them. Their legacy is a haunting echo through history, reminding us of the dangers that come with healing when the world is ruled by fear. The birth where the devil was blamed. In a time when the line between superstition and medicine was blurred by fear and ignorance, the birth of a malformed child was often seen not as a tragic medical event, but as a supernatural crime. This was a world where midwives were at once revered and feared, healers who brought life, but also scapegoats when that life was different or doomed. One such story, echoed through whispered accounts in dark village corners, tells of a midwife accused of inviting the devil himself into the womb. In medieval Europe, the understanding of birth defects and congenital malformations was virtually non-existent. Without knowledge of genetics, prenatal care, or embryology, deformities were shrouded in mystery and dread. When a child was born with physical abnormalities, twisted limbs, extra fingers, or other deviations from what was considered the natural form, panic rippled through the community. These births were often attributed to curses, witchcraft, or direct intervention by malevolent forces. The infant, seen as a vessel corrupted by evil, became a living symbol of sin and divine punishment. The midwife, entrusted with safeguarding the life of both mother and child, was frequently the first to bear the blame. She was the woman closest to the secret process of birth, the one who held knowledge that others did not. Yet, this knowledge made her vulnerable. To a fearful village, she was a liminal figure, walking the line between healer and sorceress. When the impossible happened, a child born malformed, suspicion inevitably fell on her. How else could such a terrible birth occur unless the midwife had summoned or allowed the devil to enter the womb? One particular case, recorded only in fragmented local chronicles and hushed oral histories, reveals the harsh consequences of such fears. A midwife assisted in the birth of a child so grotesquely malformed that the villagers were convinced Satan himself had been invited into the mother's body. The child's features were described in ways that defy imagination: a twisted face, limbs fused at impossible angles, and eyes that seemed to stare blankly, evoking terror and revulsion. In a society ruled by religious dogma, these abnormalities were seen not as nature's cruel hand, but as proof of demonic possession. The midwife, whose name was once known and respected in the village, was quickly transformed into a pariah. Accusations flew. She had performed dark rituals, consorted with the devil, or cursed the child before birth. Her reputation was destroyed overnight. Local clergy, powerful beyond the village's secular rulers, pronounced her guilty of inviting evil into the womb. The midwife was banished from the community, cast out like a plague bearer, and her name was deliberately erased from parish records. This erasure was symbolic, an attempt to wipe her existence from memory, as though forgetting her might cleanse the stain on the village. This tragic story embodies the deadly fusion of fear, ignorance, and religious zealotry that shaped much of medieval childbirth culture. Midwives were the front-line guardians of life in a perilous and primitive medical landscape, yet they were also convenient scapegoats for any misfortune that befell infants. The arrival of a malformed child was a moment of terror and incomprehension, forcing communities to seek explanations that aligned with their worldview, explanations that often condemned the very woman who tried to help. Underlying this fear was a deep misunderstanding of biology. Malformations, which we now understand to result from genetic mutations, environmental factors, or complications during gestation, were instead interpreted as signs of spiritual corruption. The medieval mindset could not separate the physical from the spiritual, nor disease from sin. This blurred reality made midwives vulnerable, for they navigated a world where medicine was inseparable from morality, and healing was shadowed by suspicion. Moreover, the midwife's role was uniquely dangerous because of the intimate knowledge she held. She was present at the moment life emerged, often alone with mother and child, giving her an almost mystical status. Villagers both depended on and feared her power. When outcomes were good, she was praised. When outcomes were tragic or inexplicable, she was hunted. This duality reveals a profound ambivalence in medieval communities, reverence entwined with dread. The banishment and erasure of the midwife's name from records was not merely punitive, but a warning. It signaled to others the dire consequences of crossing invisible lines between life and death, between acceptable and forbidden knowledge. The community's attempt to suppress her memory also speaks to the power of storytelling and record-keeping in controlling history. Those who were erased from the official narrative became ghosts, their stories lost or twisted by time. This narrative also shines a harsh light on the brutal treatment of women in medieval societies. Midwives were often older women, sometimes widows or healers who existed on the margins of official medicine, dominated by men and the church. Their skills were rooted in tradition and passed orally, making them vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft. The story of the midwife accused of inviting the devil into the womb is just one among countless tragedies where women's knowledge and agency were violently suppressed. It's important to remember the real human toll behind such accusations. The midwife lost her home, her community, her dignity. The mother, already burdened with the trauma of giving birth to a malformed child, suffered additional social stigma and grief. The child, often abandoned or hidden away, was marked by fate and fear. This triad of suffering reveals the tragic intersections of medicine, superstition, and societal judgment. As we reflect on this story today, we see how far medical science has come and how dangerous ignorance and fear can be. Modern genetics and prenatal care now provide explanations and support for families dealing with congenital abnormalities. Yet, the echoes of past fears remind us of the importance of compassion and understanding in the face of the unknown. The midwife accused of inviting the devil into the womb may have vanished from the records, but her story endures as a chilling testament to the power of fear and the peril faced by women who dared to bring life into a world ruled by suspicion. Her fate warns us to question narratives born from ignorance and to honor those who, despite impossible odds, stood as guardians of life in the darkest times. This story, while rooted in a distant past, resonates today as a profound lesson on the dangers of scapegoating, the intersection of medicine and morality, and the strength of women whose knowledge was feared and erased. It reminds us that behind every accusation lies a human being, vulnerable and deserving of empathy, a truth as vital now as it was centuries ago. The hidden manual passed down in silence. In an era when knowledge was power, and often perilous to possess, the secret transmission of forbidden medical texts among midwives became a silent act of resistance and survival. These hidden manuals, carefully copied by hand and passed from one trusted practitioner to another, contained invaluable knowledge on childbirth, herbal remedies, anatomy, and healing techniques. Yet owning or reading such texts was fraught with danger. Church law often deemed unauthorized medical knowledge heretical, punishable by imprisonment or even death. This clandestine tradition illuminates the fierce determination of midwives to preserve and protect life in a world that sought to silence them. The medieval period was characterized by a strict control over knowledge, especially that which concerned the body and healing. Medical texts were rare and expensive, often written in Latin, a language inaccessible to most women, especially those outside academic or clerical circles. The church and male-dominated medical guilds exerted enormous influence, limiting who could learn and practice medicine legally. For women midwives, whose work was intimately connected to the mysteries of birth and female health, this imposed a heavy barrier. Yet midwives, often marginalized by official institutions, relied on experiential knowledge and oral tradition. To supplement this, some took great risks to access written works, many of which were condemned or hidden because they challenged religious doctrine or the authority of licensed physicians. These texts could contain recipes for herbal treatments, advice on managing difficult labors, and insights into anatomy that were taboo or forbidden. The act of copying these manuscripts by hand was itself an exercise in courage and secrecy. Midwives guarded these manuals fiercely, sharing them only with trusted apprentices or colleagues sworn to silence. The transmission of this knowledge was a quiet rebellion against the suppression of female agency and medical wisdom. Every page copied was a statement of defiance, a refusal to allow life-saving knowledge to be erased or monopolized. Church authorities, however, viewed this underground exchange with deep suspicion. Medical knowledge, when wielded by unlicensed or unauthorized individuals, was conflated with witchcraft and heresy. The fear was not only about medicine, but about control, controlling bodies, belief, and power structures. The possession of these forbidden manuals was criminalized. Discovery could lead to harsh punishments, including imprisonment, public humiliation, or execution. This climate of fear forced midwives to operate in shadows, passing knowledge in whispers and secret gatherings. The manuals themselves became artifacts of resistance, hidden under floorboards, sewn into clothing, or concealed within everyday objects. They represent a hidden lineage of women healers whose wisdom survived despite institutional attempts to eradicate it. The content of these manuals often blended practical medical knowledge with spiritual and folkloric elements. Herbal recipes might be combined with prayers or rituals meant to protect mother and child from harm. This holistic approach reflected the midwives' understanding of birth as a deeply physical, emotional, and spiritual event, one that required more than just mechanical intervention. Over time, some of these secret texts influenced broader medical understanding, although often anonymously and without credit to their female originators. The erasure of women's contributions from official medical history is a direct consequence of this suppression and secrecy. It took centuries before midwifery and women's health began to reclaim a recognized place in medicine. Today, historians and scholars have uncovered fragments of these hidden manuals, piecing together the rich knowledge midwives preserved. These discoveries shed light on a parallel medical tradition that thrived beneath the surface, sustained by courage, resilience, and a commitment to care. The story of the hidden manual passed down in silence is a testament to the power of knowledge as both a tool of liberation and a target of oppression. It reminds us how crucial it is to protect and honor diverse voices in medicine and history. This legacy challenges us to acknowledge the sacrifices made by women who risked everything to safeguard life and wisdom. By understanding this secret history, we gain insight into the complex relationship between gender, power, and knowledge. We see how fear can drive persecution, but also how defiance can preserve hope. Most importantly, we honor the midwives who, through whispered knowledge and hidden texts, kept the flame of healing alive in the darkest of times. The village that drove out its midwife. In medieval villages, the role of the midwife was as vital as it was perilous. These women were the guardians of life, entrusted with bringing new generations into the world under harsh and uncertain conditions. Yet their position was often fragile, vulnerable to the tides of fear, superstition, and misunderstanding that swept through small, tightly knit communities. One haunting story captures this precarious balance: the tale of a village that drove out its midwife after a tragic series of deaths in childbirth, blaming her for wielding the dreaded evil eye. The midwife fled barefoot into the forest, disappearing forever, a symbol of how suspicion and desperation could erase even the most essential figures from medieval life. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was fraught with danger. Maternal and infant mortality rates were staggeringly high, with as many as 1 in 5 women dying in childbirth in some regions. The causes were complex: infections, hemorrhage, malnutrition, lack of hygiene, and limited medical knowledge combined to make pregnancy and delivery perilous journeys. Midwives, often women without formal training, but with years of passed-down experience, were the only line of defense against these grim odds. Their expertise was a blend of practical knowledge, herbal remedies, ritual, and tradition. Still, no amount of skill could guarantee survival, and when tragedy struck, blame often fell upon those closest to the event. In this village, the deaths of 3 women in childbirth within a short period shook the community to its core. Grief mingled with fear, and in a world where illness and death were often interpreted as the work of malevolent forces, the need to find a culprit was urgent and primal. The midwife, once respected and relied upon, became the focus of suspicion. The locals whispered that she possessed the evil eye, a powerful and destructive curse believed to cause misfortune and death simply by a jealous or malevolent gaze. The belief in the evil eye was widespread in medieval Europe and beyond, a superstition rooted in ancient fears of envy and spiritual harm. It held that certain individuals, whether knowingly or unknowingly, could inflict damage through their eyes alone. This invisible curse was feared for its unpredictability and lethality, making anyone suspected of wielding it a dangerous threat to the community's survival. For a midwife, whose role placed her in intimate contact with the most vulnerable, the pregnant and birthing women, such an accusation was a death sentence. As the community's fear escalated, the midwife found herself isolated and vilified. The trust she had built over years unraveled swiftly under the weight of sorrow and suspicion. Without allies or advocates, she faced growing hostility. The villagers, desperate to protect themselves from further tragedy, demanded her departure. With no other recourse, and sensing the rising danger, the midwife fled. According to the story, she escaped barefoot into the dense forest that bordered the village, vanishing into the wilderness and never returning. Her flight into the forest was laden with symbolism. The forest in medieval imagination was both a place of refuge and menace, a liminal space where civilization's order broke down and wildness reigned. By fleeing into the forest barefoot, the midwife rejected the safety of her former life and embraced exile in the unknown. Her disappearance erased her from the village's daily life and collective memory, leaving a void where once stood a crucial protector of life. This tragic episode reveals much about the precariousness of the midwife's role in medieval society. They were essential healers, yet their power was viewed through a prism of suspicion and fear. The deaths of women in childbirth, though often inevitable given the era's medical limitations, were personalized and moralized. Misfortune was seen not as natural, but as evidence of spiritual or magical harm, demanding a scapegoat. The midwife, bridging the worlds of healing and the supernatural, was the perfect target. It also illustrates how communal grief could quickly morph into persecution. In small, insular villages, social cohesion depended on shared beliefs and mutual trust. When trust broke down, panic and superstition filled the vacuum. The midwife's expulsion was both an act of collective self-preservation and a brutal rejection of a woman whose knowledge and care had failed to prevent loss, regardless of fault. The tale of the midwife who fled barefoot into the forest stands as a poignant reminder of the dangers faced by those who served their communities in silence and solitude. It is a story of survival and exile, fear and faith, knowledge and ignorance intertwined. It compels us to remember the human cost behind medieval childbirth's grim statistics, not just the women who died, but those who lived with the burden of blame, often alone and unloved. In modern times, we recognize the courage and expertise of midwives as vital to maternal health worldwide. The story from that village offers a stark contrast, a window into a time when fear overwhelmed gratitude and superstition displaced science. It challenges us to appreciate how far medical understanding and social attitudes have evolved, and to honor those who still walk the delicate path between life and death, bearing responsibility and risk in equal measure. Ultimately, the midwife story is a testament to the resilience of women in history, their skill, their vulnerability, and the complex social forces that shaped their lives. The village that drove out its midwife did not merely lose a healer, it lost a protector and a symbol of hope, swallowed by fear and superstition, leaving an echoing silence where life had once been nurtured with care and courage. The secret ritual. Before every birth, in the world of medieval childbirth, where danger and uncertainty shadowed every contraction, midwives were more than medical practitioners. They were guardians between this world and the next. For centuries, childbirth was fraught not only with physical peril, but also with spiritual threat. The pain of labor was believed to open a doorway, a vulnerable passage where unseen forces could enter and disrupt the birth, or worse, claim the mother or child. To navigate this perilous threshold, midwives developed secret rituals, whispered rites, and protective gestures, weaving a delicate blend of faith, superstition, and ancient tradition to shield life from dark spirits. Before the first breath of a newborn, midwives would prepare for more than just the physical act of delivery. The air itself was thought to be charged with spirits, restless souls, malevolent entities, and supernatural forces eager to seize the newborn or harm the mother in her most vulnerable state. The midwife's role extended beyond physical care into spiritual warfare. She was both healer and protector, wielding tools and charms as weapons against the invisible dangers lurking in the shadows. One of the most common protective practices was the discreet burial of iron nails near the birthing chamber. Iron, long revered in European folklore, was believed to possess potent power against spirits and witches alike. Its strength was said to repel evil, and by embedding these nails into the earth or into the threshold of the room, midwives sought to create an invisible barrier against any malevolent presence. These nails were often sharpened, driven into the ground, or hidden beneath the floorboards, acting as silent sentinels guarding the mother and child during the precarious moments of birth. Alongside iron, other objects carried symbolic weight. Sharp knives, salt, and even specially prepared herbs were placed carefully around the birthing area. Salt, a purifier in many ancient traditions, was sprinkled to cleanse the space, believed to create a sanctified boundary that spirits could not cross. Herbs such as rosemary or rue were burned as incense or laid in bundles, their scent thought to drive away evil and bring blessings. But iron nails and herbs were only part of the ritual tapestry. Midwives often whispered prayers or incantations in Latin. the sacred language of the Church, whose very words were thought to hold divine power. These whispered Latin phrases were not mere superstition. They were a spiritual armor, invoking the protection of saints and angels over the mother and her unborn child. The midwife's lips would move softly, barely audible, repeating ancient blessings that had been passed down through generations, weaving faith and folklore into a single thread of defense. These rites were performed in secret, away from the ears of the anxious family or curious servants. They were whispered in hushed tones because such knowledge was considered powerful and sometimes dangerous if revealed to the uninitiated. The midwife's expertise was not only in the knowledge of the female body, but also in navigating the unseen forces that medieval people believed inhabited every corner of their world. The practice of these protective rituals was not universal, but it was widespread across Europe and deeply embedded in the collective consciousness of the time. They were the product of a world where religion and superstition intertwined, and where the Church's authority coexisted uneasily with older pagan customs. Midwives, often women outside the formal medical establishment, held on to these folk traditions, blending the sacred and the mystical in ways that official doctrine sometimes condemned, but the desperate families desperately sought. Medieval texts and court records sometimes mention midwives in contexts of suspicion, accused of witchcraft or sorcery, precisely because of their association with these mysterious rites. Yet, these rituals were often their only tools in a world where infant and maternal mortality were tragically common. They were acts of hope, defiance, and love. These secret rites before birth were a testament to the midwife's role as protector, not just of bodies, but of souls. They remind us of a time when birth was not merely a medical event, but a profound encounter with the unknown, where life and death balanced precariously on whispered prayers and hidden charms. Today, these rituals may seem like relics of superstition, but they speak to the timeless human desire to protect the vulnerable and to find meaning and security in moments of great uncertainty. The midwife's quiet rites before every birth were an ancient armor, woven from faith, fear, and the fierce will to safeguard life against the shadows. The midwife who hid a royal scandal. One of the darkest, most secretive roles a midwife could play in medieval Europe was as a keeper of royal secrets. Among these shadowed tales, the story of a midwife ordered to declare a royal child stillborn stands out for its chilling blend of power, deception, and tragedy. This midwife's tale exposes not just a hidden birth, but a vast inheritance fraud that rippled through the highest echelons of nobility, altering destinies and rewriting history. In medieval courts, the birth of a royal heir was far more than a private family matter. It was a political event with monumental consequences. Every child born to nobility could shift alliances, provoke wars, or secure dynasties. Therefore, the control over birth announcements and records was tightly guarded, often manipulated to serve political ambitions or personal greed. Midwives, entrusted with delivering these heirs, suddenly found themselves caught in dangerous games far beyond their modest status. This particular midwife was summoned to attend a noblewoman known to be carrying a royal child whose birth was surrounded by tension and suspicion. According to secret orders, she was instructed to declare the infant stillborn, a grim decree designed to erase the child from all records. The motive? To enable a vast inheritance fraud where a rival faction could claim the estate, eliminating the rightful heir and consolidating power. Such ruthless schemes were not uncommon, especially when vast fortunes and royal favor hung in the balance. Forced into complicity, the midwife faced a moral abyss. Concealing a living child was no small act. She bore the weight of silence, knowing the life she delivered was being condemned to oblivion. The child's true fate became a forbidden secret, whispered only in the shadows. This secret burden was compounded by the ever-present danger of discovery, which could mean torture, imprisonment, or death. The situation escalated when rumors and suspicions swirled around the court. Political rivals smelled treachery, and accusations flew. The midwife was eventually arrested, accused not only of complicity, but of witchcraft and treason, a charge often leveled against those involved in court intrigues. Under the brutal torture methods of the time, designed to extract confessions regardless of truth, she revealed the terrible secret. The royal child was alive and hidden, a fact that shattered the carefully constructed lie of stillbirth. Her confession ignited a scandal of unprecedented magnitude. The revelation exposed the inheritance fraud, revealing how noble factions manipulated truth and law to serve their ambitions. The hidden child became a symbol of justice, a living challenge to the corrupt forces that sought to erase them. The scandal rocked the kingdom, leading to trials, exile, and shifts in power that echoed for decades. This midwife story is more than a tale of deception. It reflects the perilous position of women who held knowledge and power, yet were expendable pawns in political machinations. Midwives, often dismissed as mere healers, were in fact guardians of life and truth, vulnerable to exploitation by those who feared the consequences of truth. Their proximity to birth and death gave them unique insights and made them dangerous witnesses to secrets that rulers would kill to keep hidden. The harsh realities of medieval justice meant the midwife paid a heavy price for her knowledge, yet her confession ensured that the truth could not be buried, even if it meant exposing herself to fatal consequences. Her courage in revealing the royal scandal defied a system built on silence and deception, echoing through history as a reminder of the cost of truth in a world ruled by power and fear. This story also highlights how fragile the line was between survival and destruction for women who dared to serve at the intersection of life and politics. The midwife's role was never merely medical. It was political, social, and dangerous. Her tale reveals how childbirth was entangled with control, inheritance, and the deadly stakes of medieval power struggles. Today, the midwife who hid a royal scandal remains a haunting figure, emblematic of the hidden struggles behind the glittering courts and grand histories. Her story calls us to remember the silent sacrifices of women whose knowledge and lives shaped the course of history, often at unimaginable cost. In the shadows of royal birth chambers, truth was both a weapon and a curse, wielded by those brave enough to speak it and feared by those desperate to silence it. The girl trained in shadows. In the dim glow of flickering candlelight, long after the village had fallen silent, a secret world came alive, one where knowledge passed quietly from mother to daughter, whispered in hushed tones and guarded like precious treasure. This was the clandestine realm of the daughters of midwives, girls trained in the shadows because the law and custom forbade women from openly learning the healing arts. In medieval and early modern Europe, formal education was largely denied to women, especially in fields considered the domain of men, such as medicine. Towns and cities often enacted laws or customs that barred women from studying healing, pharmacy, or surgery. Yet the need for women healers, midwives, herbalists, and caregivers was undeniable, for childbirth was a perilous ordeal, and many lives depended on their skill. The daughters of midwives inherited a legacy that was both a gift and a burden. From a young age, they were initiated into secret lessons conducted under the cover of night, away from prying eyes and suspicious neighbors. These sessions were cloaked in secrecy because revealing such knowledge risked accusations of witchcraft or illegal practice. Teaching and learning healing arts was an act of quiet rebellion against societal constraints that sought to control women's roles and voices. These lessons encompassed much more than the mechanics of childbirth. They included the identification of medicinal herbs, the preparation of salves and potions, knowledge of anatomy as understood at the time, and the spiritual rituals intertwined with healing. Mothers taught daughters how to calm a laboring woman's fears, how to recognize danger signs, and how to negotiate the thin line between life and death. The training was often intense and secretive, passed down orally, and accompanied by ritual. Mothers instructed their daughters in the use of herbs like rue for easing pain, yarrow to stop bleeding, or willow bark for fever. They taught how to deliver babies in complicated situations and how to assist with newborn care when no doctor was available. These were life-saving skills, but they were also fragile knowledge, vulnerable to suppression. The shadow education was a form of resistance against the prevailing patriarchal order that marginalized women's knowledge. Formal medical schools excluded women, and male physicians often viewed midwives with suspicion and disdain. Yet midwives and their daughters persisted, safeguarding centuries of wisdom rooted in experience, observation, and community trust. This secrecy was not without peril. If discovered, both teacher and student could face severe consequences, from fines and public humiliation to accusations of sorcery or witchcraft, especially during periods of witch hunts and moral panic. The act of passing knowledge became a dangerous act of defiance, a silent rebellion against attempts to erase women's power over birth and healing. Beyond practical skills, the daughters of midwives learned resilience and courage. They inherited stories of past women who faced persecution, who healed in secret, and who understood that their work was sacred. They grew into trusted figures within their communities, often the only source of medical care for women and children, bridging the gap between folk wisdom and the harsh realities of medieval medicine. The clandestine training also shaped the cultural identity of these women. They were keepers of hidden knowledge, guardians of life's mysteries, and often mediators between the natural and spiritual worlds. Their education was holistic, blending physical care with emotional and spiritual support, recognizing that healing involved body, mind, and soul. In many cases, this secret schooling passed through generations, creating lineages of midwives and healers whose influence shaped the health and survival of countless families. These women worked quietly, away from the spotlight, yet their impact was profound and enduring. The story of the girl, trained in shadows, speaks to the broader struggle for women's education and autonomy. It reveals how societal restrictions forced knowledge underground, but could not extinguish the human drive to learn, heal, and protect. It reminds us that wisdom often survives, not in grand institutions, but in whispered lessons passed hand to hand in the darkest hours. Today, as we acknowledge the contributions of women to medicine and science, we owe much to those daughters of midwives who dared to learn and teach in secret. Their courage laid the foundation for the gradual recognition of women's vital role in healthcare. The shadows where they learned were not just places of secrecy, but crucibles where knowledge, resistance, and hope were forged, lighting the way toward a more inclusive future, the church that forbade midwives to pray. In many medieval communities, the role of the midwife extended far beyond the physical act of childbirth. These women were not only healers of the body, but also spiritual guides who offered comfort, prayers, and blessings to mothers and newborns during the most vulnerable moments of life. Yet, in some regions, this sacred aspect of their work was brutally curtailed by the Church, which forbade midwives from performing any form of prayer or spiritual rite. This prohibition was enforced under threat of excommunication, a punishment that severed the individual from the religious community and condemned their soul in the eyes of medieval society. To understand this harsh interdiction, one must consider the deeply entwined nature of religion, power, and gender in the medieval world. The Church wielded immense influence over all aspects of life, including health and death. Spiritual authority was centralized in the hands of the clergy, who guarded the exclusive right to conduct prayers, sacraments, and blessings. Midwives, often women without formal religious status, were seen as encroaching on this sacred domain when they offered spiritual comfort during childbirth, a moment believed to be filled with both divine presence and peril. The Church's fear was twofold. First, it sought to maintain control over spiritual practices and the souls of its followers. Allowing midwives to pray or bless during childbirth challenged the clergy's monopoly on salvation and the administration of sacraments. Second, the act of praying for the dying mother or child was perceived as a form of spiritual power that, if wielded by women outside church sanction, could be suspect or dangerous. In an era when women's spiritual authority was heavily restricted, this was a clear boundary not to be crossed. Excommunication was the ultimate ecclesiastical sanction, effectively cutting a person off from the community of believers, denying them access to church rites, and marking them as spiritually condemned. For midwives, this was not merely a religious punishment, but a social death sentence. The fear of excommunication enforced compliance and discouraged midwives from offering prayers or blessings, even though these acts were often the only comfort a mother could receive during the harrowing ordeal of childbirth. Historical records reveal cases where midwives were reprimanded or even prosecuted for performing what were considered unauthorized spiritual acts. The prohibition stripped midwives of their role as holistic caregivers, both physical and spiritual, diminishing their authority and alienating them from the community they served. This exclusion also reflected broader societal attempts to suppress women's agency and maintain patriarchal control over both body and soul. Despite these restrictions, many midwives continued their spiritual work in secret, whispering prayers and blessings when no one watched. Their spiritual care was essential to families who understood childbirth as a deeply sacred and uncertain event, where physical danger was inseparable from spiritual risk. The Church's prohibition did not erase these practices, but pushed them underground, intensifying the tension between official authority and lived experience. This conflict highlights the complex dynamics between institutional religion and popular belief in the medieval period. It reveals how control over spiritual practices was a battleground for power, gender, and knowledge. The Church's attempts to monopolize prayer during childbirth served to marginalize midwives, eroding their status and reinforcing gender hierarchies. Reflecting on this history, we see how the denial of spiritual agency to midwives was not only an attack on their professional role, but also a profound injustice to the women and families who relied on their care. It underscores the intersection of faith, fear, and authority in shaping medieval life and the enduring resilience of women who navigated these challenges. Today, acknowledging this aspect of midwives' history enriches our understanding of their multifaceted contributions to health and community. It honors the silent struggles of those who ministered to body and spirit under threat of exclusion. Their courage in the face of institutional prohibition is a testament to the enduring human need for compassion, healing, and spiritual connection, especially in the most vulnerable moments of life, the midwife who smuggled women to safety. In the dark shadow of the witch hunts that swept across Europe between the 15th and 17th centuries, midwives were among the most vulnerable yet vital figures targeted by fear and persecution. Accused of consorting with demons or practicing witchcraft, these women faced trials, torture, and often death by burning at the stake. Yet, amid the terror and chaos, some courageous midwives used their knowledge, connections, and wit to save lives. One such midwife became a beacon of hope by smuggling women to safety, disguising them as nuns or wet nurses, and thereby rescuing dozens from the fiery fate that awaited them. The witch hunts were fueled by a toxic mixture of religious fervor, social upheaval, misogyny, and superstition. Women who defied societal norms, possessed medical knowledge, or simply aroused suspicion could be accused of witchcraft. Midwives, with their intimate understanding of herbs, fertility, and the human body, were particularly vulnerable. They occupied a liminal space, seen as healers and helpers, yet feared as possible witches wielding unnatural powers. This suspicion turned deadly as Inquisition spread, often targeting women who were healers or unmarried and independent. In this perilous context, the midwife's role transformed from solely bringing life into the world to actively preserving it against the brutal forces of persecution. Using her position and trust within the community, she orchestrated daring rescues. She helped women accused of witchcraft escape by disguising them in roles considered safe and respectable, as nuns bound by religious vows and cloaked in the church's protection, or as wet nurses whose services were in high demand among the nobility and gentry. Disguising accused women as nuns was a masterstroke of subterfuge. Convents offered relative sanctuary, with strict boundaries and rituals that deterred outsiders. By providing these women with nuns' habits and identities, the midwife shielded them from inquisitors who might hesitate to violate sacred religious spaces or confront women under the church's protection. These disguises were convincing enough to allow the fugitives to be hidden away until the witch hunts subsided. Similarly, posing women as wet nurses was equally ingenious. Wet nurses were employed to breastfeed and care for infants, a trusted and necessary role in aristocratic households. By placing accused women in such positions, the midwife ensured they were in environments where they could remain under close watch, but without suspicion. Their presence was practical and socially accepted, offering cover that prevented authorities from arresting them outright. The logistics of these rescues required not only courage, but a deep network of allies. The midwife had to secure disguises, arrange transportation, and coordinate safe houses, all while evading vigilant inquisitors and informants. The risk was immense. Discovery meant death for the midwife and those she protected. Yet, driven by compassion and defiance, she pressed on, often under the cover of darkness, leading women through forests, across borders, and into the safety of religious institutions or noble households. Her efforts saved dozens of women who otherwise would have faced torture, public humiliation, and execution. These women, once condemned as witches, were granted a new chance at life, disguised and protected by the midwife's resourcefulness. Her actions challenged the brutal narratives imposed by witch hunters, demonstrating resistance through empathy and strategic cunning. This midwife story exemplifies the complexity of women's roles in early modern Europe. While often marginalized, women wielded significant power through knowledge of healing, midwifery, and social networks. The midwife was not only a healer, but a protector and rescuer, navigating the dangerous intersection of gender, power, and belief in a time when survival depended on both courage and cunning. Historically, midwives faced the paradox of being both essential to life and feared as agents of death. Their knowledge made them targets in societies where ignorance bred suspicion. The witch hunts revealed this tension starkly, with thousands of women persecuted for crimes they did not commit. Yet, in the shadows of this horror, stories like that of the midwife who smuggled women to safety shine brightly, offering testament to resistance and humanity amid darkness. Her legacy is a reminder that in the face of systemic oppression, individual acts of bravery and compassion can save lives and preserve dignity. Through disguise, subterfuge, and unwavering commitment, she carved out pockets of sanctuary in a world consumed by fear and hatred. Today, this story resonates as a powerful symbol of resistance against injustice, a tribute to those who protect the vulnerable, and a reflection on the enduring strength of women who, despite the odds, fight to safeguard life and freedom. The midwife who risked everything to save women from the flames stands as a timeless emblem of hope, courage, and the transformative power of empathy in even the darkest chapters of human history. The Plague. Midwife buried in secret. In the darkest days of the Black Death, when death descended like a merciless storm across medieval Europe, entire villages were ravaged by an invisible enemy. The plague spared no one. Nobles and peasants alike were felled by its swift and terrible grip. Among the many who faced this horror, midwives occupied a unique and tragic position. They were women of life, bringing new souls into the world even as death stalked the land. Yet, during this plague, their very presence became feared, their sacred role shadowed by suspicion and dread. This is the story of one midwife who, in the face of overwhelming terror, continued to serve the dying and the living, and who, after her death, was buried in secret, her memory swallowed by silence. The Black Death, which struck Europe between 1347 and 1351, claimed the lives of an estimated 1/3 of the population. Its symptoms were brutal and swift: fever, swelling buboes, bleeding, and delirium, turning vibrant communities into ghost towns. In this chaos, midwives were both essential and endangered. They were called upon to assist women through childbirth, even as the plague threatened the very breath of life. But their proximity to the sick marked them as potential carriers of death, and fear soon turned to suspicion and ostracism. This particular midwife was renowned for her unwavering courage. She traveled tirelessly through her village and the surrounding countryside, attending to women stricken with the plague, helping mothers bring life into a world darkened by death. Her hands, once a source of comfort and hope, were now stained by the tragedy she witnessed daily. Yet she remained steadfast, refusing to abandon her duty despite the dangers that stalked her every step. Villagers, overwhelmed by grief and fear, began to view her not only as a healer, but as a symbol of death itself. Superstition took root. Whispers spread that her touch carried the plague, that her presence summoned spirits of the dead. Fear hardened into dread, and the midwife found herself increasingly isolated, a woman who bridged the realms of life and death but belonged to neither. When the midwife herself succumbed to the plague, the community faced a terrible dilemma. The rites of burial, sacred and communal, were tainted by terror. To bury her openly risked inviting the wrath of restless spirits, or so the villagers believed. So, in a desperate act of fearful reverence, they buried her in secret, a quiet grave hidden from the eyes of the living, placed far from the village churchyard and away from hallowed ground. This secret burial was both a punishment and a protection, a way to contain the fear that had grown around her, to silence the memory of the woman who dared to touch death to give life. It was said that villagers feared her ghost would return to haunt them, a restless spirit trapped between worlds because her death had been shrouded in silence and shame. The tale of this midwife is echoed in many accounts of plague times, where those who worked closest with the sick were often shunned or accused of witchcraft. Midwives, healers, and carers walked a perilous line, revered for their skills, yet condemned for their proximity to death. Their knowledge of life's most vulnerable moments made them both indispensable and suspect. Historically, secret burials were not uncommon during the plague. Bodies of the infected were often interred hurriedly, without ceremony, to prevent the spread of disease and to appease superstitions. Those associated with the plague, even in death, were sometimes denied the dignity of public burial rites. The fear of contagion extended beyond the physical into the spiritual realm, breeding legends of ghosts, curses, and restless souls. This midwife story shines a harsh light on the cruel realities of the Black Death, where compassion could be twisted into fear, and the very act of saving life could lead to ostracism in death. It also reflects the profound isolation faced by those who stood at the threshold of life and death, bearing burdens invisible to most. Today, as we remember the victims of the plague and the heroes who faced it, the secret burial of the plague midwife stands as a somber reminder of the price paid by caregivers in times of crisis. It invites us to honor the courage of those who serve amid fear and to recognize the heavy toll borne by those who heal. Her grave may remain hidden beneath the earth, her name lost to silence, but her story endures, a testament to the fearless spirit of a woman who chose life and duty in the face of unimaginable darkness, and who, even in death, became a haunting symbol of sacrifice and forgotten valor. The birth that exposed a bishop's sin. In the tightly woven fabric of medieval society, the church was a pillar of authority, its power nearly absolute in shaping politics, culture, and daily life. Yet beneath the towering spires and hallowed halls, scandal and secrecy simmered, secrets that threatened to unravel the very foundation of ecclesiastical power. One such secret came to light through the courageous and dangerous role of a midwife, whose testimony following the birth of a bishop's illegitimate child sent shockwaves through a cathedral's sacred walls. Midwives in the medieval period occupied a paradoxical place, revered for their life-saving skills, yet often viewed with suspicion, especially when their knowledge threatened powerful interests. This particular midwife was called upon to assist a noblewoman in secret, away from prying eyes. The child she delivered was not just any child, but one fathered by a prominent bishop, an act of forbidden desire and grave hypocrisy in an institution that demanded celibacy and moral purity. The birth itself was fraught with danger. Concealing the child's paternity was essential to protect the bishop's reputation and preserve the cathedral's influence. Any revelation could spark scandal, weaken the church's grip over the region, and invite political upheaval. The midwife, entrusted with this secret, understood the gravity of her role. Her knowledge was a ticking time bomb beneath the sanctity of the church. Despite immense pressure, the midwife's conscience could not remain silent. When she testified about the child's true parentage, she challenged not just a man, but a vast network of religious and political power. Her words threatened to expose widespread corruption within the cathedral's hierarchy, revealing how some church officials exploited their positions to indulge in illicit relationships and abuses of power. Her testimony nearly brought the cathedral's authority to its knees. Noble families and clergy alike trembled at the implications, fearing loss of influence and the collapse of established order. The scandal ignited fierce backlash. Efforts were made to discredit the midwife, silence her voice, and erase any trace of the accusation. Powerful figures mobilized to contain the damage, using threats, bribes, and intimidation. Amidst this turmoil, the midwife vanished mysteriously. Some say she was forcibly removed or killed to protect the church's secrets. Others believe she fled into hiding to escape persecution. Her disappearance added another layer of darkness to the story, transforming her from a mere witness into a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. The birth that exposed a bishop's sin reveals the perilous intersection of gender, power, and truth in medieval times. Midwives, as custodians of life and hidden knowledge, held the capacity to challenge entrenched authorities, but paid a high price for their courage. This story underscores the fragility of institutional power when confronted with inconvenient truths and the lengths to which those in power will go to preserve their dominion. In the centuries that followed, echoes of this scandal resonated as a cautionary tale of hypocrisy and the silencing of women's voices. The midwife's brave act, though nearly erased from history, reminds us of the vital role played by those who dare to speak truth to power, especially when that power is cloaked in sanctity and intimidation. Her legacy endures in the shadows of forgotten chambers and whispered legends, a testament to the dangers faced by women whose knowledge threatened the very pillars of medieval society. The birth she witnessed was not just of a child, but of a reckoning, a moment when hidden sins threatened to unravel the Church's carefully maintained facade, and when a single midwife's testimony became a beacon of forbidden truth, the midwife who used moon charts. In the dim world of medieval Europe, where superstition ruled minds and fear shaped every suspicion, midwives who dared to track the moon's phases faced accusations far beyond mere mistrust. For centuries, the moon, its waxing and waning light, was more than just a celestial body. It was believed to hold mysterious powers, connected to magic, pagan rituals, and witchcraft. To align one's work with the moon was to flirt with the forbidden, and yet some midwives embraced this ancient knowledge quietly, knowing it could mean the difference between life and death. Long before modern obstetrics, midwives relied on experience, oral tradition, and keen observation. Among the many subtle techniques passed down, tracking lunar cycles was a practice rooted in folklore and practical observation alike. Many believed that the moon influenced water, tides, and human bodies, the latter especially during childbirth, where the body's fluids and timing seemed mysteriously entwined with lunar rhythms. One midwife, whose name has vanished into the shadows of history, stood out for her devotion to these moon charts. She carefully noted the moon's phases, new, waxing, full, and waning, and timed her interventions accordingly. Her meticulous records, passed quietly among trusted circles, revealed a pattern. Births during certain lunar phases appeared to have better outcomes. Mothers labored more smoothly, infants cried with stronger lungs, and survival rates climbed steadily. Yet this knowledge, though life-saving, was dangerous. To outsiders, the midwife's reliance on moon cycles was not seen as medical insight, but as pagan sorcery. The Church and local authorities often equated any practice outside their sanctioned rituals as heresy or witchcraft. In an era rife with witch hunts and moral panic, the midwife's moon charts made her a target. Her work was whispered about with suspicion, her intentions twisted into accusations of collusion with dark forces. The tension between empirical wisdom and superstition was acute. While some respected midwives for their undeniable skill, others feared their knowledge, especially when it involved the mysterious moon. The midwife was forced to navigate a perilous path, balancing the hope she offered to mothers against the threats from a society quick to condemn what it did not understand. Despite the risks, the midwife's secret observances endured. Her moon charts, carefully hidden from prying eyes, became tools not only of survival, but of resistance against ignorance. By aligning births with lunar cycles, she harnessed an ancient rhythm that connected nature and life in ways science only later began to explore. Historically, the moon's influence on birth has intrigued both scholars and folk healers. Even today, some believe more babies are born during full moons, though science remains divided. For medieval midwives, however, the moon was a practical guide in an unpredictable world. It was a beacon in darkness, a natural clock to help time one of humanity's most sacred acts. The story of the midwife who used moon charts reveals the complexities of medieval medicine and belief. It shows how women healers often combined observation, tradition, and intuition to improve outcomes against formidable odds. It also exposes the dangers they faced when their knowledge was branded heresy. This midwife's courage and dedication saved lives in secret, even as the world around her sought to silence her. Her legacy is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge passed through generations, often hidden in plain sight. Her story invites us to look beyond superstition and appreciate the deep wisdom in ancient practices, reminding us that sometimes the path to healing runs through the very shadows that fear tries to cast. In honoring her, we acknowledge the resilience of women who bridged worlds, the seen and unseen, the known and the mysterious, to protect life. Her moon charts, though lost to history, reflect a timeless truth, that healing is as much an art as a science, woven through time and guided by the subtle rhythms of nature. The secret marks on the doorframe. In the shadows of medieval villages, where superstition and faith intertwined, some midwives practiced ancient protective rites that transcended mere medicine. One of the most secretive and powerful acts was the marking of doorframes with symbolic runes or signs intended to shield newborns from evil spirits and malevolent forces. These marks, often simple scratches or carved symbols, were believed to create a protective barrier, safeguarding the fragile new life inside from harm. Yet this silent ritual, rooted in deep folk wisdom, was dangerous to perform openly. If discovered, these protective symbols were seen by authorities as proof of devilcraft and could lead to the midwife's arrest or worse. The medieval world was permeated with a profound fear of the supernatural. Newborns were particularly vulnerable in the eyes of their communities, exposed to both physical dangers and spiritual threats. Infant mortality was tragically common, and many attributed sudden illnesses or deaths to curses, witches, or demonic interference. In this context, midwives acted not only as medical caregivers, but as spiritual guardians, drawing upon a blend of Christian and pre-Christian traditions to protect life. Marking doorframes was an ancient practice inherited from pagan customs long before Christianity dominated Europe. These symbols were believed to confuse or repel evil spirits, sealing the home with a mystical shield. The midwife, as the keeper of life's threshold, was entrusted with performing this rite discreetly, often at the moment of birth or shortly after, as part of the wider ritual of welcoming a child into the world. However, the rise of church orthodoxy and the spread of witchcraft fears transformed these benign acts into acts of defiance. The church increasingly condemned any practices that did not align strictly with sanctioned Christian rites as heresy or sorcery. Protective symbols on doorframes, no matter how ancient or well-intentioned, became suspect signs of occult activity. Witch hunters and local authorities used such marks as tangible evidence during trials, interpreting them as communications with the devil rather than protection against him. The risk for midwives was immense. Discovery of these secret markings could result in immediate arrest, interrogation, and accusations of witchcraft. The midwife's role as healer and protector was twisted into that of a malefactor wielding dark powers. Trials often involved forced confessions extracted under torture, and punishments were brutal and public, intended to terrify the community into compliance and suppress traditional folk practices. This grim reality forced midwives to conduct their protective rituals in utmost secrecy. The markings were made swiftly, often hidden in obscure places on the doorframe or disguised as simple scratches. Passing knowledge of these symbols became part of an oral tradition, carefully guarded and whispered only to trusted apprentices. the silent language of protection was a lifeline against the encroaching fear and repression. The story of the secret marks on doorframes is a vivid example of how cultural misunderstandings and institutional power turned healing traditions into criminal acts. It reflects the broader persecution of women healers whose knowledge blended spiritual and practical care. The fear of the unknown and the desire to control community beliefs led to tragic consequences for those who dared to protect life through ancient rites. Today, these secret marks remind us of the resilience of folk wisdom and the courage of midwives who navigated dangerous social terrain to defend the most vulnerable. They symbolize a lost heritage of women's spiritual and medical knowledge, suppressed but never entirely extinguished. The marks are silent witnesses to a world where healing and fear, faith and superstition lived side by side, often at great cost to those who bore the burden of care. By uncovering this history, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complex interplay of power, belief, and survival in medieval life. We honor the midwives who, despite threats and persecution, held fast to their sacred duty to protect and nurture new life, marking doorframes not with malice, but with love and hope. The woman who helped with stillbirths and was shunned. In medieval society, the role of the midwife was crucial, not only for the delivery of new life, but also for the somber duty of handling death at its very threshold. One of the most heart-wrenching tasks midwives faced was assisting with stillbirths, the births of infants who entered the world lifeless. This responsibility was both necessary and deeply painful, yet it often cast a dark shadow over the midwife's reputation, leading to suspicion, blame, and sometimes exile. Stillbirths were tragically common in the Middle Ages, with estimates suggesting that up to 25% of pregnancies ended this way due to poor maternal health, infections, malnutrition, and lack of medical knowledge. The reasons were many, but understanding was minimal. When a baby was born dead, it was a communal tragedy and a personal heartbreak for the mother and family. The midwife was present at this moment, bearing witness to death as intimately as she did to life. Because midwives were the ones assisting with these losses, communities often unfairly associated them with failure or even malevolence. In a world governed by superstition and religious interpretation, repeated stillbirths were sometimes seen as a curse or a sign that the midwife had brought bad luck or dark forces upon the family. The notion of guilt was heavy, and suspicion grew when stillbirths accumulated under a single midwife's care. The act of assisting with the burial of stillborn infants was necessary, yet isolating. Unlike the joyous celebrations that followed successful births, stillbirths were marked by sorrow and silence. Midwives were responsible for preparing the infant's body, sometimes performing last rites or ensuring a proper burial, roles that connected them closely with death and the supernatural realm in the eyes of their communities. This proximity to death compounded the fear and mistrust surrounding midwives. As caretakers of both birth and death, they occupied a liminal space that many found unsettling. When too many stillbirths occurred, the midwife was often blamed, accused of incompetence or worse, of being cursed, wicked, or in league with dark forces. Such accusations could lead to social ostracism, loss of livelihood, or forced exile from the village. Exile was one of the harshest punishments. Being cast out meant the loss of community, home, and status. For a midwife, it also meant the loss of her calling and the destruction of the trust that formed the foundation of her work. Without community support, survival became precarious. The midwife's skills might be sought elsewhere, but the stain of suspicion was difficult to escape. This tragic pattern reveals the intense pressures faced by midwives, caught between the harsh realities of medieval childbirth and the superstitions that shaped societal reactions. Their expertise was invaluable, yet their position was fraught with danger, especially when outcomes were poor. The woman who helped with stillbirths bore the dual burden of grief and blame, embodying the fragile intersection of life, death, and belief. Her story speaks to the broader cultural dynamics of the time. Death was not just a biological event, but a spiritual and social crisis. Midwives' roles extended beyond physical care to navigating the emotional and ritual needs of families. Yet the lack of scientific understanding meant that they often became scapegoats for tragedies they could neither prevent nor control. In reflecting on this history, we gain insight into the complexities of medieval life and the precarious position of women who served as healers and caregivers. The midwife's experience with stillbirths illuminates the profound challenges of working in an era where life and death were entwined with fear, superstition, and fragile trust. Today, the work of midwives is honored and supported by medical science and compassionate care, with far greater understanding of pregnancy loss and stillbirth. Yet, the echoes of those ancient suspicions remind us how crucial it is to support and respect those who bring life into the world and accompany families through their most vulnerable moments. The woman who helped with stillbirths and was shunned embodies a story of endurance and silent sorrow. Her experience underscores the human cost of ignorance and fear, and the resilience required to face death daily while still striving to nurture life. Through remembering her, we honor all midwives who have carried the weight of life and death across history, often in the shadows, and yet with unwavering courage, the recipe book that could get you executed. In the shadowed corners of medieval villages and towns, midwives held a knowledge both vital and forbidden. Their hands brought new life into the world, but their minds harbored secrets passed down through generations, ancient herbal remedies, and potions written carefully in weathered recipe books. These texts, often compiled in secret, were invaluable guides to easing pain, inducing labor, stemming bleeding, or treating infections. Yet, in a world dominated by the Church's watchful eyes and suspicion, these books became dangerous possessions, their pages branded as witchcraft, their keepers marked for death. The medieval midwife was not merely a birth attendant. She was a healer, a botanist, and a keeper of arcane wisdom. In an era before modern medicine, when the boundaries between science, magic, and religion blurred, herbal knowledge was essential. Midwives relied on plants like pennyroyal, rue, and willow bark to coax labor, soothe pain, or fight illness. These remedies, recorded in personal recipe books, sometimes called herbal grimoires, were treasured family heirlooms, protected with the utmost care. But the Church, seeking to control all aspects of life and health, viewed this folk knowledge with deep suspicion. Herbalism, particularly when practiced by women, was increasingly associated with witchcraft. The Church's growing authority in the late medieval and early Renaissance periods led to the demonization of traditional healers. Recipe books, no matter how practical or benevolent, were seen as dangerous texts, capable of spreading evil or conjuring demons. To possess such a book was to invite suspicion of sorcery. When Church authorities discovered a midwife's herbal recipe book, the consequences could be fatal. These books were confiscated, and their contents examined for signs of heresy or occult practices. The delicate leaves, pressed flowers, and inked instructions became evidence in witch trials. The midwife herself could be accused of consorting with the devil, using her knowledge to harm rather than heal. Historical records from witch trials across Europe reveal the brutal fates that befell many midwives accused in this way. Their herbal books were publicly burned in terrifying ceremonies, meant to purge communities of evil influences. These burnings were not just acts of punishment, but a chilling warning to others, to abandon forbidden knowledge or face the flames. Yet, despite the risks, many midwives continued to compile and protect their recipe books in secret. These texts were passed down through families, often disguised as mundane notebooks or hidden in false compartments. The recipes within combined practical knowledge with spiritual invocations, blending the sacred and the herbal. They represented a lineage of women's knowledge, wisdom born of centuries of observation and experience. The very act of preserving these books was an act of defiance against the erasure of women's roles in healthcare. In a society that marginalized female healers and elevated male-dominated medicine, these herbal grimoires symbolized a form of resistance. They challenged the monopoly of the church and the emerging professional medical guilds by offering accessible remedies to women and the poor. One such book, rediscovered centuries later, reveals recipes for tinctures to ease labor pains, poultices for infections, and even herbal abortifacients, substances used to terminate pregnancies in a time when such practices were secret and taboo. The inclusion of these recipes underscores the delicate and dangerous balance midwives maintained, serving their communities while navigating the perilous landscape of religious and legal prohibition. The story of the midwife's recipe book that could get you executed is a stark reminder of how knowledge can become a battleground for power. It illustrates how fear and control shaped the fates of women who dared to heal in their own way. The Church's campaign against these herbal texts was not just about religion, but about asserting authority over bodies, health, and women's agency. Today, as we unearth and study these ancient texts, we honor the courage of those midwives who preserved knowledge under threat of death. Their herbal recipe books offer a window into a lost world, where healing and fear coexisted, and where every remedy was a whisper of rebellion. The pages that once risked burning now teach us about resilience, tradition, and the enduring power of women's knowledge. They remind us that the pursuit of healing has often been fraught with danger, especially for those who dared to hold the secrets of life in their hands. The midwife who was paid in secrets. In the delicate balance of medieval life, midwives occupied a unique position, trusted guardians of women's most vulnerable moments, yet constantly shadowed by suspicion and danger. Their hands brought life into the world, but their lips often carried the weight of secrets, whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors. In many communities, midwives were not paid in coins or gold, but in silence, a currency both protective and burdensome, binding them to the hidden truths of those they served. Money was scarce and often insufficient in the harsh realities of medieval villages and towns. Instead, a midwife's compensation frequently took the form of promises, the vow of silence from the women and families she aided. These promises were not mere courtesies, but vital shields against the volatile judgments of neighbors, clergy, and local authorities. To expose the truths that midwives witnessed, whether illicit births, forbidden affairs, or whispered scandals, was to invite danger not only to the families involved, but to the midwife herself. This silent payment created a complex web of trust and secrecy. The midwife became a confidant, a keeper of stories no one else dared speak aloud. Every birth she attended was a vault of hidden emotions and untold circumstances. Sometimes these were tales of joy and new beginnings. Other times they were dark narratives of betrayal, shame, or survival. The midwife's knowledge was a double-edged sword, granting her respect and fear in equal measure. Yet this currency of silence was heavy. Burdened by layers of untold truths, midwives carried the emotional and moral weight of their community's most guarded secrets. The silence they preserved protected lives, but often isolated them, forcing them to navigate a world of suspicion without revealing the truths they held. In an era when women's autonomy was limited and rumors could lead to accusations of witchcraft or immorality, this silence was both armor and prison. The promise of silence also protected the midwife from legal and religious persecution. In a time when childbirth was fraught with danger, any complication could lead to blame and suspicion. If a child was stillborn or a mother died, whispers might point to the midwife's supposed maleficence or unholy knowledge. The silent pact with her clients was a safeguard, a mutual agreement that shielded her from the deadly reach of accusations. But keeping these secrets exacted a personal toll. Midwives bore witness to injustices, betrayals, and tragedies that often went unresolved. Their role extended beyond healing bodies. They were silent witnesses to the fractures within families and communities. The emotional labor was immense, compounded by the fear that any slip of the tongue could shatter their fragile protection. Despite these burdens, midwives remained indispensable. Their acceptance of silence as payment reflected not just economic realities, but a profound understanding of their precarious social standing. It was a survival strategy in a world where knowledge could be lethal, and loyalty was measured in quiet trust rather than wealth. Today, the story of the midwife paid in secrets offers a window into the unspoken dynamics of medieval communities. It reminds us that silence can be a powerful currency, one that can protect, bind, and weigh heavily upon those who hold it. The midwife's whispered pact was a fragile yet vital thread in the fabric of society, preserving lives and histories in equal measure, hidden beneath layers of untold truths and enduring trust. The hidden room beneath the barn. In a world governed by strict moral codes and unforgiving social judgment, the fate of unwed mothers was often bleak and harsh. Pregnancies out of wedlock were shrouded in shame, and women who found themselves in this predicament faced ostracization, violence, or worse. Yet, in one small village, a courageous midwife took a bold and secretive step to protect these vulnerable women by creating a hidden birthing space beneath a barn, a sanctuary carved out of shadows and silence. This midwife was known among a close circle as a healer who defied convention. While many feared the repercussions of aiding unwed mothers, she saw beyond the rigid laws and religious condemnation. Her compassion led her to design a concealed chamber beneath an old weathered barn on the outskirts of town, an underground refuge where women could give birth away from prying eyes, judgment, and cruelty. The secret room was accessed through a trapdoor hidden beneath loose floorboards, descending into a dimly lit, modest chamber. It was furnished simply: straw for bedding, clean cloths for swaddling, and small jars of herbs to ease pain and promote healing. This space was more than a physical shelter. It was a symbol of hope and quiet rebellion against the harsh realities imposed by society. For years, the midwife clandestinely assisted women in this hidden room. Mothers who had nowhere else to turn found refuge and care. The midwife's efforts were whispered about in hushed tones. Rumors circulated, but no proof ever emerged. The barn stood as an unassuming facade, masking the life-saving acts performed beneath its foundations. However, decades later, when the barn was slated for renovation, the dark secret was uncovered. During the removal of floorboards and excavation of the subterranean chamber, workers found skeletal remains alongside fragments of cloth, worn birthing tools, and faded herbs. The discovery sent ripples through the local community, forcing a reckoning with a forgotten past. The bones, likely those of infants born and possibly lost in this hidden room, revealed the tragic reality of unwed motherhood in a time when social stigma often led to neglect, abandonment, or worse. These remains were silent witnesses to lives begun in secrecy, lives that society refused to acknowledge. The cloth and tools found alongside suggested care and tenderness, a stark contrast to the cold judgment these women endured. This hidden birthing space highlights the perilous intersection of morality, survival, and compassion in historical contexts. The midwife's secret room was a lifeline, a radical act of empathy in an unforgiving world. It underscores how women's agency and care often had to operate underground, away from the watchful eyes of law and church. The story also raises haunting questions about the fate of those infants and mothers, about the dangers of childbirth without support, about the desperation that drove women to hidden places, and about the costs paid by those forced into the shadows. The discovery of bones beneath the barn is a somber reminder of the many untold stories of pain, love, and resilience that history often overlooks. Today, this secret room stands as a powerful symbol of resistance against social cruelty and an enduring testament to the courage of midwives who dared to challenge the status quo. It reminds us that care and compassion sometimes had to hide in darkness to survive, and that the shadows of history hold both pain and hope. As we uncover such hidden spaces and stories, we honor those who suffered and those who fought to protect life against impossible odds. The midwife beneath the barn may have been erased from official records, but her secret room and the lives it sheltered continue to speak across time, a whispered legacy of love, defiance, and the unyielding human spirit. The trial that sparked a town revolt. In the heart of a small medieval village, where community ties were tightly woven by daily lives and shared struggles, a beloved midwife's arrest ignited a spark that would challenge centuries of authority and fear. This midwife, revered not only for her unmatched skill in bringing new life safely into the world, but also for her kindness and steadfast presence in times of crisis, was suddenly accused of magic, a charge synonymous with witchcraft and devilry. What followed was not silence or submission, but a fierce and unprecedented revolt by the villagers themselves, who rose up to defend the woman who had saved their families and healed their bodies and souls. The trial began under the heavy shadow of church and secular powers, who wielded accusations of witchcraft as instruments of control and fear. To accuse a midwife of magic was to weaponize superstition against those who held intimate knowledge of birth and healing, knowledge that often transcended the limited medical understanding sanctioned by male physicians or religious officials. This particular midwife's successes and the trust she commanded made her a symbol of independence and female agency in a world that sought to contain both. As news of her arrest spread, the village's reaction was swift and visceral. For generations, she had been a pillar of the community, present at every birth and death, offering comfort and expertise where official medicine was absent or inadequate. To the villagers, the charges were absurd, a cruel injustice born of fear rather than fact. Mothers whose lives she had saved, families who had witnessed her tireless care, and neighbors who had shared their joys and sorrows with her united in outrage. This collective sense of betrayal galvanized the community into action. The people, once submissive to the intertwined powers of church and state, found courage in their shared experience and refused to accept the midwife's condemnation. They confronted the clergy and local authorities, demanding her immediate release. When words failed, they took to the streets in protest, driving out the clergy who represented the oppressive forces threatening their beloved healer. The revolt was remarkable not only for its boldness, but also for its rarity. Medieval society was rigidly hierarchical, with church authority seldom challenged so openly by common folk. This uprising demonstrated the power of communal bonds and the deep respect held for women healers who bridged the physical and spiritual worlds. The villagers' defiance sent a clear message. The midwife was not just an individual, but a vital thread in the social fabric, and her persecution was an attack on the community itself. Historical records from similar events show that such revolts could alter local power dynamics, forcing authorities to reconsider harsh actions lest they provoke wider unrest. The trial became a turning point, exposing the fragile balance between institutional control and popular will. It underscored how deeply midwives were embedded in the life and identity of their communities, and how their persecution could ignite resistance. The midwife's eventual release, secured through the unyielding support of her village, was more than a personal victory. It was a testament to the strength of collective action and the human need to protect those who heal and nurture. Her story echoes through history as a powerful example of how ordinary people can challenge injustice when motivated by loyalty, love, and a sense of justice. Reflecting on this revolt invites us to reconsider the narratives of medieval power, revealing spaces where the marginalized could assert agency against overwhelming odds. It also reminds us that fear and superstition, while potent, were not unchallenged forces. Communities could and did stand up to protect their own. Today, the tale of the midwife and her village inspires a profound respect for those who fight for justice and compassion in the face of oppression. It honors the enduring legacy of midwives, not just as medical practitioners, but as essential pillars of trust, resilience, and community spirit. Their courage, and that of those who stood by them, shines as a beacon of hope and resistance in the often dark annals of history. In the perilous world of medieval childbirth, midwives faced dangers that extended far beyond the physical challenges of delivering babies. Among these threats was the ever-present fear of hostile mobs, angry relatives, superstitious neighbors, or frightened villagers who might turn violent if a birth went wrong or if suspicions arose. To protect themselves and to ensure the survival of the mother and child, some midwives concealed small daggers hidden within their aprons or skirts. These blades were not weapons of aggression, but crucial tools for swift action and escape in moments of crisis. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was fraught with uncertainty and risk. Without modern medicine, complications could escalate quickly. One of the most critical moments was the cutting of the umbilical cord, a delicate act that required precision and timing. A delayed or botched severing could threaten both mother and newborn. Midwives needed to act swiftly, often in chaotic and tense environments. The presence of mobs intensified the pressure. In many communities, blame for a difficult or fatal birth was easily assigned to the midwife. Accusations of witchcraft or negligence could lead to violent reprisals. Families grieving a lost child or mother sometimes sought scapegoats, and the midwife, as the closest figure to the event, was vulnerable. Rumors and fears could incite crowds to rage, demanding punishment or even death. In response to these dangers, midwives adapted by carrying small daggers concealed in their aprons. These daggers were practical tools designed to cut the umbilical cord quickly and cleanly, enabling the midwife to complete the birth ritual efficiently. But their purpose went beyond medical utility. They also served as a lifeline, allowing the midwife to sever the cord and flee immediately if the situation became too volatile. The dagger's concealment speaks to the precariousness of the midwife's position. It was a symbol of both her skill and her vulnerability. Hidden close to the body, it was always within reach, a silent safeguard against the unpredictable dangers lurking around childbirth. The fact that these daggers were carried not for attack, but for escape reveals the constant tension between care and survival in the midwife's world. Historical records and accounts from the period attest to the fraught atmosphere surrounding childbirth. Midwives were often caught in the crossfire of social anxieties and medical emergencies. Their knowledge was both revered and feared, and their presence at the bedside could inspire gratitude or suspicion. The dagger was a small but potent emblem of their need to navigate this treacherous terrain. Moreover, the dagger's dual role highlights the complexity of midwifery as a profession. It required not only medical expertise, but also courage, quick thinking, and self-preservation. Midwives had to manage the physical demands of birth, the emotional weight of families, and the social dangers posed by superstition and communal unrest. In carrying the dagger, midwives acknowledged the realities of their time. A world where childbirth was a high-stakes event shadowed by fear, where their actions could mean life or death, not only for mother and child, but for themselves. The dagger was a silent witness to countless births, a tool that balanced hope and peril. Today, the image of a midwife with a hidden dagger may seem striking, even unsettling, but it captures a vital truth about the history of childbirth. It reminds us of the bravery and resilience required of those who stood at the threshold of life and death, often alone and unprotected. It speaks to the enduring human instinct to prepare, protect, and survive, even in the face of the unknown. The dagger hidden in the apron is more than a tool. It is a symbol of a woman's determination to save lives while safeguarding her own. It tells a story of skill, danger, and survival woven into the fabric of history. A testament to the courage of midwives who faced every birth with both hope and vigilance, ready to act, and, if necessary, to flee into the uncertain night. The midwife who kept 2 ledgers. In the veiled world of medieval birth and lineage, a midwife's role extended far beyond the simple act of delivery. She was the silent chronicler of life's most intimate moments, a keeper of secrets whispered in the shadows of noble halls and humble cottages alike. Among the many midwives whose stories remain hidden by time, one stands out. A woman who carried not 1, but 2 ledgers. One was for the world to see, recording the names of births with careful, unassuming script. The other was hidden away, a secret codex containing the unspoken truths of a society built on appearances, affairs, noble bastards, incestuous liaisons, and crimes never spoken aloud. In a time when bloodlines dictated power, property, and privilege, the truth of parentage was the most dangerous secret of all. Noble families went to great lengths to conceal indiscretions, ensuring that illegitimate children never threatened their carefully constructed legacies. Midwives were often the sole witnesses to these hidden realities. Their knowledge, if revealed, could topple dynasties and shatter reputations. Thus, discretion was not only a professional duty, but a matter of life and death. This midwife, trusted by both peasantry and nobility, meticulously maintained a ledger of births. This public record, presented to local authorities or noble households, was a testament to her reliability and professionalism. It showed a neat, respectable list of names, dates, and the legitimate lineage of children born under her care. This ledger was proof that she did her duty and could be trusted with the sacred task of ensuring the continuity of family lines. But hidden from sight was a second ledger, kept under lock and key, known only to her. This book held a darker, more dangerous truth. In its pages were scribbled the names of children born out of wedlock, those fathered by forbidden lovers or under circumstances that could ruin powerful families if exposed. It detailed illicit affairs between noblemen and servants, secret pregnancies concealed by threats and bribes, and children born from incestuous unions hidden from church and crown. It even recorded crimes that intersected with birth, kidnappings, forced marriages, and concealments that no official record dared touch. The existence of such a secret ledger reveals the precarious position midwives occupied in medieval society. They were the guardians of life and, paradoxically, the keepers of society's darkest secrets. The knowledge contained in that hidden book was a heavy burden. To reveal it would mean ruin for those involved, and possibly death for the midwife herself. To keep it secret was to live with the weight of countless lives and lies, forever entangled in the fragile web of human deception. Throughout history, there have been whispers of such ledgers. Some midwives were rumored to have been bribed to destroy or alter records, while others were feared as gatekeepers of scandal. Their power lay not in their hands alone, but in their pen, the ability to record or erase truths that could alter the course of families and fortunes. This secret ledger also served a grim purpose. It was a form of protection. By holding the truth, the midwife wielded a subtle power. Families who sought her silence might offer protection, gold, or influence, ensuring she remained loyal and discreet. But this power was double-edged. If betrayed or threatened, the midwife risked exposure to accusations of witchcraft, conspiracy, or treason. The secrecy surrounding this second ledger speaks to the social and political tensions of the time. The church and nobility demanded purity of blood and unblemished records, yet human nature and desire often defied such rigid structures. The hidden ledger was a testament to the contradictions at the heart of medieval society, the conflict between appearance and reality, order and chaos, truth and silence. In some ways, the midwife's double ledgers were a metaphor for the medieval world itself. One public face carefully curated to maintain order, and a hidden undercurrent of secrets and sins suppressed beneath the surface. Her story reminds us that history is not only written in official records, but also in the shadows of what was never said aloud. The midwife who kept two ledgers was both witness and protector, a silent sentinel guarding the fragile secrets of birth and power. Her legacy is a haunting echo of the complex, often dangerous dance between truth and silence that shaped the lives of generations. As we uncover fragments of these hidden stories, we glimpse the profound human drama behind the medieval veil, lives marked by secrecy, loyalty, fear, and the ever-present tension between what must be known and what must be forgotten. The forbidden baptism that saved a soul. In the shadowed corners of medieval villages, where life and death often hung in precarious balance, midwives held not only the power to usher new life into the world, but also the burden of safeguarding souls. Among the most profound acts they performed in secret was the baptism of dying infants, a sacred rite officially reserved for priests, yet desperately necessary for those moments when no clergy were near. This forbidden baptism, carried out quietly and at great personal risk, was a lifeline for many souls teetering on the edge of eternity. The Church's strict rules dictated that baptism, a sacrament believed essential for salvation, could only be administered by ordained priests. Yet the realities of medieval life were harsh. Clergy were often distant, scarce in rural areas, or unavailable during sudden births or deaths. When an infant was born sickly or near death, the clock was ticking. Without baptism, the child's soul was feared to be lost to damnation, condemned to wander the afterlife without peace. Midwives, witnessing these desperate moments firsthand, took it upon themselves to perform emergency baptisms. Armed with simple water and whispered prayers, they defied ecclesiastical law to offer infants a chance at salvation. This act was not taken lightly. It was a profound expression of compassion and faith, reflecting the midwives' intimate understanding of life's fragility and the spiritual stakes at hand. However, this defiance came at a steep price. The Church viewed unauthorized baptisms as a direct challenge to its authority and control over sacred rites. Midwives caught performing these ceremonies faced accusations of heresy and sacrilege. Punishments ranged from public shaming and fines to imprisonment and, in extreme cases, execution. The risk was magnified by the fact that midwives were often women of low social standing, vulnerable to persecution, and lacking the protection afforded to clergy. Despite these dangers, many midwives persisted, driven by their commitment to their communities and the spiritual well-being of the children they helped bring into the world. Their secret baptisms were acts of quiet rebellion and profound mercy, transcending institutional boundaries to serve a higher purpose. These clandestine ceremonies also reveal the complex intersection of gender, religion, and power in medieval society. While the Church sought to monopolize spiritual authority, midwives embodied a grassroots form of religious practice, rooted in care, immediacy, and a deep connection to life's cycles. Their forbidden baptisms challenged rigid hierarchies and highlighted the gaps between doctrine and lived experience. The legacy of these midwives is a testament to courage and compassion in the face of oppressive structures. Their secret baptisms saved countless souls, offering hope where the official Church's reach could not extend. Though many were punished and their stories suppressed, their acts endure as a poignant reminder of the human spirit's resilience and the quiet power of faith practiced in defiance. Today, the tale of the forbidden baptism illuminates the hidden histories of women who navigated perilous moral landscapes to protect life and soul alike. It challenges us to reconsider the boundaries of authority and the sacrifices made by those who dared to bend the rules for mercy. In the silent prayers whispered by midwives over the dying, we glimpse a profound act of love that defied both earthly and divine laws, forever entwined in the delicate dance between salvation and survival, the birth where soldiers waited outside. In an era when the fate of a family, a lineage, and even a kingdom often hinged on the birth of a male heir, childbirth was rarely a private or peaceful affair. The pressure was immense, the stakes unbearably high, and the midwife caught in the eye of a storm she could scarcely control. One harrowing birth, remembered in fragmented accounts, unfolded under the watchful eyes of armed soldiers stationed outside the birthing chamber, an ominous guard whose presence spoke volumes about the unforgiving expectations placed upon women and their midwives. This was a time when patriarchal societies valued male offspring above all else. Sons were seen as carriers of the family name, inheritors of property, and future protectors of honor. The birth of a daughter, especially to noble or ruling families, was often met with disappointment, sometimes with outright fury. The pressure to produce a male heir was relentless, and failure was not merely a personal tragedy, but a political and social crisis. The midwife attending this particular birth understood what was at stake. She was summoned not just to assist in bringing new life into the world, but to guarantee that life would be the right kind, a son. Soldiers, armed and grim-faced, waited just beyond the door, their presence a constant reminder of the consequences should the outcome not meet expectations. The midwife's hands were steady, but her heart was heavy with the knowledge that the child's sex would determine not only the mother's fate, but her own. As labor progressed, tension thickened the air. Every cry, every moment of silence weighed heavily on those within and without the chamber. When the child finally emerged, the room fell into a breathless hush. The infant was a daughter, fragile and perfect, but tragically not the son that was demanded. In that moment, the midwife became the focus of blame and fear. To the soldiers and the ruling family, the birth of a daughter was interpreted not as a natural event, but as a failure, a personal and professional disgrace. Rumors spread that the midwife had erred, that her care was insufficient, or worse, that she had deliberately sabotaged the birth. In a culture where accusations of witchcraft and malfeasance were levied against midwives with alarming ease, such claims carried deadly weight. The midwife faced not only social ruin, but the terrifying prospect of execution. In some regions, midwives blamed for failing to produce male heirs were punished harshly, seen as threats to the social order. Their skill and knowledge, once valued, could be twisted into evidence of malintent or incompetence. The soldiers outside the chamber were not just guards. They were enforcers of a brutal system where women's bodies were battlegrounds for power and lineage. This story reveals the brutal intersection of gender, power, and medicine in historical childbirth. It shows how midwives, often women with deep knowledge and skill, were trapped in systems that demanded perfection beyond their control. The birth of a child, a moment of hope and renewal, became instead a moment of judgment and potential tragedy. It also highlights the unbearable pressure placed on mothers and midwives alike, forced to bear the weight of societal expectations that valued sons over daughters. The presence of armed soldiers at a birth underscores the extent to which control over women's reproductive outcomes was militarized and politicized. In reflecting on this story today, we recognize the human cost of such rigid systems, how fear and power shaped the most intimate moments of life. The midwife who delivered under armed guard embodies both courage and vulnerability, a figure caught between healing and hazard, between life-giving and life-threatening forces. Her story calls us to remember the countless women whose lives were constrained by harsh rules and impossible demands. It reminds us that behind every birth, every child, there are stories of bravery, fear, and resilience. Stories too often lost to history, but essential to understanding the human experience. In honoring the midwife and the mother who faced soldiers waiting outside the birthing chamber, we acknowledge the enduring struggle for dignity, respect, and compassion in childbirth, a struggle that continues to resonate across time and culture. The woman who saved a queen but lost her life. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, few stories are as poignant and shrouded in mystery as that of the midwife who delivered a royal heir, yet lost her own life just days later. This woman, entrusted with the most delicate and critical task, bringing a future monarch into the world, became a silent figure in a tale woven with power, secrecy, and perhaps deadly intrigue. While her skill ensured the survival of a queen's child, her sudden and suspicious death has led historians to believe she was deliberately silenced to conceal complications during the birth, or a secret twin whose existence threatened the royal line. Childbirth in the medieval royal courts was an event charged with enormous political significance. The birth of an heir could stabilize a dynasty, settle disputes, or ignite fresh rivalries. Every detail was scrutinized, and every outcome was of national consequence. Midwives in such environments were not merely caregivers. They were guardians of the kingdom's future, bearing the weight of immense responsibility and danger. This midwife's role was critical. She brought the royal child safely into the world, a feat celebrated by courtiers and subjects alike. Yet the success concealed a hidden story, one whispered behind closed doors and carefully omitted from official chronicles. Some historians suspect that complications arose during the delivery, perhaps a difficult labor or the presence of a secret twin who was swiftly hidden or eliminated to prevent succession crises. The idea of a secret twin is not without precedent in royal histories, where concealed births or infant deaths were sometimes orchestrated to protect dynastic claims. Such secrets were guarded fiercely, and those privy to them, including midwives, were vulnerable to severe consequences if they spoke out. The midwife's untimely death shortly after the birth raises troubling questions about whether she was a victim of foul play, silenced to ensure that inconvenient truths remained buried. Records from the period are often sparse or biased, carefully crafted by those in power to present a sanitized version of events. The absence of a detailed account of her death fuels speculation. Was she struck down by natural causes exacerbated by the strain of a perilous delivery? Or was her demise orchestrated by courtiers seeking to control the narrative? The truth remains elusive, locked away in the shadows of history. The midwife sacrifice underscores the perilous position of women healers in royal courts. Their expertise was indispensable, yet their autonomy was precarious. They operated under the watchful eyes of nobility, where political intrigue could turn deadly. Their lives were expendable once their purpose was served, especially if they threatened to reveal truths that could destabilize the throne. This tragic story also reveals the broader dynamics of power and secrecy in medieval governance. The control of information about royal births was a strategic tool, shaping perceptions and legitimacy. Those who managed this information, including midwives, wielded quiet but profound influence, an influence that could make them targets. Today, the tale of the midwife who saved a queen but lost her life invites us to reflect on the unseen costs of history's great events. It humanizes the silent figures behind monumental moments and highlights the risks borne by those who cared for life's most vulnerable. Her story is a haunting reminder of how courage and expertise can be overshadowed by the ruthless calculus of power. By examining her fate, we honor not only her skill and dedication, but also the countless women whose stories have been lost or obscured in the annals of history. Her life and death illuminate the fragile line between reverence and repression faced by midwives and women healers throughout time, and the enduring mysteries that still captivate our imagination. The midwife who talked to spirits. In the shadowed world of medieval Europe, where the boundary between the living and the dead was often blurred by superstition and fear, midwives occupied a uniquely vulnerable and mysterious position. Their intimate knowledge of birth, life, and death intertwined with local beliefs about spirits, curses, and the unseen forces that shaped human destiny. Among these midwives was one woman whose practices brought her perilously close to accusations of witchcraft and mediumship. She claimed to speak to the spirits of ancestors, calling upon their protection to safeguard newborns during the fragile moments of birth. Yet, this spiritual communion, meant as a blessing, became her undoing, leading to a trial and a tragic execution by drowning. Medieval communities placed great weight on spiritual protection during childbirth, a time fraught with danger for both mother and infant. The perils of mortality were not merely physical, but thought to be influenced by malevolent forces, curses, and restless spirits. Midwives, as both healers and ritual specialists, often incorporated prayers, charms, and invocations to divine or ancestral powers to shield their charges from harm. To speak with spirits was seen by some as sacred. To others, it was a dangerous crossing into forbidden realms. This particular midwife embraced the belief that the spirits of ancestors could guard newborns against evil. She would enter trance-like states or perform rituals meant to commune with these protective forces, seeking guidance and safety for each birth she attended. Her work combined practical skill with spiritual devotion, reflecting a worldview where life and death were bound to unseen spiritual realities. However, in an era dominated by rigid church doctrines and fear of heresy, such practices were fraught with risk. Claims of spirit communication could be construed as necromancy or mediumship, acts deemed heretical and often equated with witchcraft. The church and secular authorities were vigilant in rooting out what they perceived as threats to religious orthodoxy and social order. Women who stepped outside accepted norms, especially those wielding spiritual authority, were particularly vulnerable. Accusations against the midwife arose amid a climate of fear and suspicion. Rumors spread that her communion with spirits was unnatural, that she consorted with demons rather than saints. The protective rituals she performed were recast as spells or curses. As the witch hunts intensified, such allegations could swiftly lead to arrest, trial, and brutal punishment. The midwife's trial was emblematic of the tragic collision between folk spirituality and institutionalized religion. She defended her actions as sacred, insisting that her intentions were to protect life, not harm it. Yet the courts were unforgiving. The evidence was hearsay, fear, and prejudice. Convicted of witchcraft or heresy, her sentence was death by drowning, a punishment that was both a means of execution and a symbolic purification. Drowning was often used as a test of guilt or innocence. To be submerged in water, a sacred element, was thought to reveal the truth. In her case, it was the final act of a grim drama that silenced a woman who had sought to harness ancestral power for good. Her death underscored the deadly consequences of deviating from accepted spiritual and social norms. This midwife story reveals the complex and often dangerous role women played as healers and spiritual mediators in medieval society. Their knowledge and practices existed at the margins of sanctioned religion and popular belief. The line between reverence and suspicion was perilously thin, and crossing it could mean death. Moreover, her tale highlights the broader theme of how female agency and spirituality were policed and punished. Women who claimed spiritual authority challenged patriarchal structures and were often silenced by brutal means. The midwife who talked to spirits embodied both the hope of protection and the threat of heresy in the eyes of her contemporaries. Reflecting on this history invites us to consider the cultural conflicts and fears that shaped medieval life, where the unseen world was both a source of comfort and terror. It reminds us of the courage it took for women to serve as guardians of life and spiritual intermediaries amid such peril. Today, her story resonates as a powerful testament to the resilience of women who bridged worlds between life and death, seen and unseen, faith and fear. It calls us to remember the countless lives lost to superstition and intolerance, and to honor those who, like this midwife, sought to bring protection and healing through both skill and spirit, even when it meant facing the ultimate sacrifice. The coin sewn into her sleeve. In medieval Europe, the role of a midwife was fraught with contradictions. She was both revered and reviled, essential yet vulnerable, a healer who held the power to bring life, but who also attracted suspicion simply for her success. Midwives operated in a delicate social balance, navigating not only the physical dangers of childbirth, but also the ever-watchful eyes of a society quick to judge and slow to forgive. Among the many ways midwives protected themselves was a subtle yet telling practice: hiding coins sewn into their sleeves, a secret safeguard against accusations of greed, bribery, or worse, witchcraft. Money exchanged hands in childbirth. Midwives were often paid in coins, goods, or services, reflecting the value of their indispensable skills. But in a world where wealth was tightly policed by social hierarchies and religious scrutiny, a midwife seen as too wealthy could quickly become the target of suspicion. Accusations of greed, sorcery, or collusion with dark forces were not uncommon. To be perceived as amassing fortune beyond one's station was a dangerous sign, one that could lead to ruin or even death. To avoid such peril, midwives devised a cunning method of concealment. Coins were sewn into the folds of their clothing, hidden beneath sleeves, tucked inside hems, or stitched in secret pockets. This covert hoarding served multiple purposes. It protected their earnings from theft, a constant risk in itinerant or communal life, but it also shielded them from prying eyes and gossip. By keeping payment out of plain sight, midwives maintained an appearance of modesty and humility, essential virtues in a deeply religious society. This practice of hiding coins was more than mere prudence. It was a survival tactic. Medieval communities were often rife with envy and suspicion, especially toward women who held independent power or wealth. A midwife who flaunted her earnings risked social exile or worse. Rumors of witchcraft were often sparked by perceived prosperity among women who practiced healing arts outside formal male-dominated medicine. The church and local authorities scrutinized such women, sometimes using accusations of greed as a pretext for persecution. Sewn coins also symbolized the precarious autonomy of midwives. They were women who operated at the intersection of the domestic and the public, trusted with sacred tasks but denied full acceptance. Their earnings, often modest yet hard-won, were a testament to their skill and importance. But these same earnings marked them as outsiders in a rigid social order. Historical accounts and folklore abound with stories of midwives accused of hoarding wealth or greed, charges frequently used to undermine their reputation. In some tragic cases, such accusations escalated to witch hunts, where midwives were arrested, tortured, and executed. The very act of receiving payment for their work could be twisted into evidence of dark dealings with the devil. The coins sewn into sleeves were thus a silent rebellion, a way to claim and protect their labor and livelihood in a world that often sought to deny them both. It was a way to preserve dignity amid adversity and maintain some measure of control over their lives. Moreover, this hidden wealth was often shared. Midwives used their earnings not just for personal survival, but to support their families, to purchase herbs and tools necessary for their work, and to assist women who could not pay. In this light, the sewn coins were a quiet form of empowerment, a resource carefully guarded to continue their mission of care. The practice also speaks to the intimate knowledge midwives had of clothing and textiles, skills in sewing and mending that allowed them to create secret pockets and compartments. This expertise in the domestic arts complemented their medical knowledge, blending practicality with necessity. The story of the coin sewn into a midwife's sleeve reveals the complex dance between visibility and invisibility in medieval women's lives. It highlights the tension between service and suspicion, between survival and social control. Today, these hidden coins remind us of the courage and ingenuity of midwives who navigated perilous social landscapes with quiet defiance. Their sewn treasures were not mere currency, but symbols of resilience, a testament to their indispensable yet vulnerable place in history. As we imagine those tiny coins tucked away beneath layers of fabric, we see the midwife not just as a figure of healing, but as a woman who mastered the art of survival, guarding her livelihood, her honor, and her secrets, one stitch at a time. The woman who vanished. After a difficult birth. In the shadowed recesses of medieval Europe, where superstition and reality often collided in unsettling ways, there is a story that has echoed through the centuries, one of a midwife who vanished after a tragic and mysterious birth. This tale, rooted in historical accounts and steeped in folklore, reveals the fragile balance between life, death, and the fears that gripped entire communities. The midwife's disappearance after a stillbirth, blamed on the stars, and the chilling cries heard from the nearby woods every full moon weave a narrative that is as haunting as it is revealing of medieval society's complex relationship with birth, death, and the unknown. Childbirth in medieval times was perilous. The mortality rate for mothers and infants was staggeringly high due to a lack of medical knowledge, poor hygiene, and limited access to trained care. Midwives were among the few trusted figures to assist women in labor, often relying on a mixture of herbal remedies, experience, and spiritual rituals. Their role was both revered and feared. While midwives brought life into the world, they were also intimately connected to death, witnessing the fragility of existence daily. Their knowledge straddled the line between healing and the mysterious forces that were believed to govern fate and fortune. In many rural villages, the stars and heavens were not just distant lights, but active players in human destiny. Astrology was interwoven with daily life and health. The alignment of celestial bodies was thought to influence everything from crops to childbirth. A difficult birth or a stillbirth was frequently attributed to unfavorable star configurations, casting a shadow of cosmic blame over natural tragedies. In this context, the midwife who attended the stillbirth was caught in an impossible situation, responsible in the eyes of the villagers, yet powerless against fate. The birth in question was especially difficult. Historical records from similar cases describe women enduring prolonged labor, exhaustion, and sometimes complications that midwives could do little to remedy. The infant's death was devastating. In an age without neonatal care or understanding of infections, such outcomes were tragically common, yet each stillbirth was a profound loss that rippled through families and communities. The midwife, having done all within her knowledge and means, became the focus of grief, suspicion, and blame. Shortly after the stillbirth, the midwife disappeared. Some chronicles suggest she fled to escape the villagers' accusations and the weight of failure. Others whisper of darker possibilities, that the midwife was taken by the forces she had long been thought to commune with, or that she was ostracized, forced into exile, or worse. The ambiguity surrounding her vanishing adds to the tale's eerie allure, blurring the lines between history and myth. What truly intensified the villagers' fear were the reports of haunting cries from the woods on every full moon. This phenomenon became ingrained in local folklore, interpreted as the restless spirit of the lost child, or perhaps the midwife's own sorrow manifesting beyond the grave. The woods, already places of mystery and superstition, became sites of dread, with the cries amplifying the community's collective grief and fear. These nocturnal sounds were not unique to this story, but part of a broader medieval tradition where natural phenomena were often imbued with supernatural significance. The significance of this story lies not only in its eerie elements, but in what it reveals about medieval attitudes toward women, death, and the inexplicable. Midwives occupied precarious social positions. They were both essential and marginalized. Their intimate knowledge of birth made them powerful, yet vulnerable to accusations of witchcraft or malevolence when tragedies occurred. The disappearance of this midwife underscores the harsh realities faced by women who bore immense responsibility, yet were denied protection and understanding. Moreover, the cosmic blame placed on the stars reflects the period's struggle to comprehend the mysteries of life and death. Without scientific explanations, people turned to astrology and superstition to make sense of their suffering. These beliefs provided a framework to explain the unexplainable, but they also perpetuated fear and stigma, particularly toward those directly involved in childbirth. This story also highlights the role of oral tradition and folklore in preserving history. The cries from the woods and the vanishing midwife became symbolic, a narrative that both mourned loss and warned against the dangers lurking in the unknown. It serves as a reminder of how communities process trauma and uncertainty through storytelling, creating legends that carried moral, spiritual, and social lessons. In modern times, while medicine has vastly reduced the risks associated with childbirth, the echoes of such stories remind us of the precariousness of life in earlier eras and the enduring power of myth to shape our understanding of human experience. The woman who vanished after a difficult birth remains a poignant figure, a symbol of the fragility of existence, the weight of communal fears, and the silent suffering of those caught at the intersection of fate and humanity. Her tale invites us to reflect on the historical struggles of women who navigated the perilous world of childbirth under the watchful eyes of superstition and judgment. It challenges us to honor the resilience of midwives and mothers alike, whose courage and endurance shaped the course of history often without recognition. As we listen to the story of the midwife and the full moon cries echoing through the woods, we are drawn into a medieval world where every birth was a battle, every death a mystery, and every silence a story waiting to be told. This haunting narrative stands as a testament to the human spirit's struggle to find meaning amid loss and the eternal hope for peace beyond the shadows, the secret burial ground for midwives. In a world where faith shaped every aspect of life and death, burial rites were not mere ceremonies, but essential passages to the afterlife. Yet, for many midwives across medieval and early modern Europe, even in death, dignity was denied. Though they spent their lives bringing others into the world, these women were often refused burial in consecrated ground, cast instead into secret burial plots hidden deep within dark forests, graves marked only by stones and herbs, silent testimonies to lives lived on the margins of both society and faith. The refusal to grant midwives a place in consecrated cemeteries was rooted in a complex mix of fear, suspicion, and religious doctrine. Midwives occupied a precarious social position, revered for their life-saving skills, yet feared as possible witches or agents of dark forces. Their intimate knowledge of childbirth, herbal remedies, and the female body placed them in a liminal space, close to the sacred mystery of birth, but also dangerously close to perceived paganism and sorcery. Church authorities often viewed midwives with suspicion, particularly if the women had any reputation for using herbs or rituals considered unorthodox. The line between healer and heretic was perilously thin. In times of heightened witch hunts and moral panic, this suspicion translated into social exclusion even after death. To be denied consecrated burial was to be denied spiritual salvation in the eyes of the community. As a result, many midwives were buried secretly in hidden plots, usually deep within forests or on the outskirts of villages. These burial grounds were far from churchyards, cloaked in shadows and secrecy. They became resting places not only for midwives, but for others deemed unworthy by the church, outcasts, accused witches, and social pariahs. The graves themselves were marked not by elaborate tombstones or inscriptions, but by simple stones, rough and uncarved, and by herbs believed to protect the dead or aid their spirits. Lavender, rosemary, and rue were commonly used, plants associated with purification, protection, and memory. These herbs created a fragrant but somber reminder of the buried woman's connection to healing and nature. The secrecy surrounding these burial grounds was both imposed and embraced. Families and communities, while fearful of openly honoring these women, often sought to preserve their memory in private ways. The placement of stones and herbs was an act of quiet reverence, a way to acknowledge the midwife's vital role despite official condemnation. Over time, many of these burial sites fell into obscurity, their locations forgotten or deliberately concealed. Yet, archaeological finds in remote woodlands have unearthed such hidden cemeteries, revealing clusters of modest graves surrounded by medicinal plants. These discoveries shed light on the lives and deaths of women whose contributions were essential yet marginalized. The secret burial grounds stand as powerful symbols of the duality midwives faced, women who brought life yet were denied sacred rest. They embody the tension between society's dependence on midwives and its simultaneous fear and distrust. These plots are silent witnesses to the erasure of women's histories and the resilience of memory preserved through nature's own markers. Reflecting on these hidden graves, we confront the painful legacy of exclusion and the cost of fear-driven prejudice. The midwives who rest beneath stones and herbs remind us that healing and care have long been intertwined with sacrifice and marginalization. Their stories compel us to honor not only their lives, but their deaths, to recognize the injustice they endured, and to reclaim the forgotten chapters of women's history. The secret burial grounds, once places of shame, now serve as sacred spaces of remembrance, teaching us that dignity in death is inseparable from respect in life. In the quiet woods where stones and herbs mark their resting places, the midwives speak across centuries, testaments to courage, compassion, and the enduring spirit of women who healed in shadows, yet shaped the very fabric of human survival.